3 seconds, a flash of green-white breath across black. And then the wrongness settles in. Something from beyond our sky is pushing back at the Sunday. We were supposed to be looking at dust and heat, and a tail that surrenders to light. Instead, there's a column of radiance leaning toward the star, as if a river flowing uphill, as if winter wind exhaling into a furnace and not evaporating. The image should calm us, a familiar dance of ice and fire, but the geometry won't obey. It presses inward. It resists. Breathe in. Across observatories and kitchen tables and midnight phones, the first frames travel like a rumour. You can almost hear the room change the soft hush when a story turns real. Our instruments whisper numbers. Our eyes give them meaning. In that overlap, awe becomes a language we never finished learning. Breathe out. This visitor has a name, but names are only the memory we attach to motion. What matters is what it's doing and what it refuses to do. The sky teaches humility. It also tests it. We have rules for comets. We have stories for exceptions. But we have fewer words for a contradiction that will not blink. Light, silence, memory, breath. Listen to the quiet between frames. Feel the pulse of a question forming where certainty used to live. Something is reorganizing our expectations, one pixel at a time. On most nights, the cosmos is patient. Tonight, it is intimate. It leans close enough that we can feel the heat. It waits just long enough for our hearts to match its rhythm. And on December 19, well, find out what it means. The images were clear and deeply wrong. We expect tales to yield, to trail away like the soft handwriting of heat across vacuum. Instead, a column cleaner than it should be, brighter than our language, leans sunward, as if answering a question we didn't ask. Even before numbers arrive, our bodies register them. That small pause in the room, that instinct to hold breath so the image won't ripple. Curiosity enters first, but concern is close behind, stepping in without knocking. Light writes history onto sensors. Sensors become memory. Memory becomes story. And the story we tell ourselves tonight begins with a contradiction that refuses to let us look away. The first wave is adrenaline disguised as awe. We replay, zoom, recalibrate. Somewhere between the photons and our doubt, a shape starts holding. A long, coherent jet that doesn't behave like a shrug of vapor. Comets are supposed to be messy, turbulent, ragged, beautiful in their surrender. This looks disciplined. Not just bright, but intentional in its geometry. If this is natural, it's nature we don't yet remember. We start with what we know. Outgassing can surprise. Volatiles can concentrate. Vents can align like accidental engines for a few heartbeats of orbital time. The sun is not a gentle parent. It pulls and pries and lights old ice into breath. But columns like this, sustained, sun-facing, coherent across distance, are rare in the quiet way that makes astronomers sit up straighter. The room fills with numbers, temperatures, angles, pixel counts against star fields. We ask for energy, and energy answers like a ledger that doesn't balance. If the jet is releasing matter at the apparent rate, the budget starts looking like a bad myth. You cannot spend what you don't have, not for long. And yet the brightness suggests a generosity that the nucleus should not be able to afford. The mind reaches for familiar anchors. Maybe it's a trick of perspective, a tale that only pretends to lean sunward because we're standing at a strange angle in the dark. Maybe the camera exaggerated it, or the processing nudged a faint strand into a spear. We test each idea like a step on a winter river, cautious, listening for cracks. What keeps returning is the way the structure holds. For minutes, then hours. It wavers but doesn't dissolve. The column is a voice that refuses to lower itself to background noise. If the numbers are right, then the story we've told ourselves is too small. Concern blooms quietly, not fear, just the weight that arrives when a pattern leans beyond our comfort. A comet fighting the sun feels like a metaphor. It also feels like a problem. Where is the energy coming from? What mechanism allows the jet to remain so focused, so aligned with the very source that should be unthreading it? We put the frames side by side with memory other comets, other visitors, the first interstellar whisper we nearly missed years ago. Back then, the surprise was absence. No fuzz, no coma, just a shard of light accelerating like a thought that refused to slow down. This time, the surprise is abundance. A fountain instead of a ghost, a choir instead of a single note. The comparison started as a joke. It doesn't feel like one now. Inside, the hum of analysis. Silence gathers in corners, the kind of silence that asks for humility. We remind ourselves, extraordinary images are not extraordinary claims. The universe can be strange within the rules. The list of contenders lengthens exotic ices, fractal vents, the choreography of spin and shadow. Each candidate puts a hand on the lock and tries to turn it. Some move it a little. None of them opened it completely. And then the date arrives in the conversation like a drumbeat. December 19. Closest approach to us. A tighter window for truth. If this visitor holds together by then, if the light remains disciplined, if the column keeps meeting the star with its chin lifted, then the questions sharpen. If, instead, it frays into a confetti of ordinary fate, we file the night under miracle of chaos and move on with a slightly larger map of what nature can improvise. Either way, the clock starts. What if the shock wasn't the image, but what it unlocks in us? The human part of the story doesn't live in the data alone. It lives in 12,000 eyes choosing not to sleep, in soft murmurs across chat windows, in the way a freshman's pulse races the first time they see numbers that tilt the room. We are present at a threshold. You can feel it in the attention, the kind of collective focus that makes strangers feel like a chorus. Awe is not a conclusion. It's a doorway. You step through, and the air changes. Questions breathe differently here. The world narrows to a thread of light and widens to include everything that thread might mean. The sun is a clock. The jet is a sentence. Our task is not to finish it too quickly. So we slow down, pace our breath with the sky's breath. We watch for bias masquerading as elegance. We resist the gravity of our favourite hypotheses, letting them orbit our attention without letting them land. Skepticism is not coldness. It's fidelity to the way truth arrives rarely in one piece, often with edges that only fit after we've sanded our pride down to humility. Still, there is a feeling, and it won't be bullied into quiet. The geometry bothers us. The endurance of the column bothers us. The ledger bothers us. And in the background, a quieter bother hums, the way this visitor seems to select a performance that speaks in our tongue: clarity, alignment, defiance, endurance. If it's only an echo of physics, then physics is more theatrical than we gave it credit for. We end where we began. In the room with the lights low, the screen breathing, the heart learning a new meter. The images were clear and deeply wrong, but wrongness, handled gently, is a teacher. It points not just at the sky, but at us. How we look, how we listen, how we change when confronted by a beauty that misbehaves. December 19 isn't just a date. It's a mirror we're walking toward. We don't know which story will be true, yet the one where the column collapses into ordinary, or the one where it holds and forces our vocabulary to grow. Between now and then, we will listen. Between frames, we will breathe. The light will keep writing. We will learn how to read it. Where is the energy coming from? You can dress a paradox in elegant figures, but the suit doesn't fix the mismatch. A comet is a bank account of ancient ice, dust, and trapped gases. The sun is the relentless auditor. When the account heats, it spends sublimation, jets, a tale that writes its expenses in light. The ledger is supposed to add up. Tonight, it doesn't. We begin with the simplest frame: how bright the jet is, how long it holds, how narrowly it stays collimated while leaning toward the very star that should tear it apart. From brightness, we estimate mass flow. From mass flow, we estimate energy. From energy, we estimate whether the nucleus could plausibly fund this spectacle without bankrupting itself. The math is public. The unease is personal. You don't need exotic theory to feel the rub. If a fountain runs that strongly, the reservoir must fall. If it doesn't, something is refilling it or our instruments are lying. And the instruments, tested and cross-checked, keep refusing to lie. The next move is cautious honesty. Put a number on the discomfort. The back of the envelope first, because reality should survive a napkin. Convert luminosity to particle counts, approximate exhaust velocity, fold in a reasonable jet cross-section and duty cycle. Then map it against nucleus size. Even with conservative assumptions, the output stacks into a monthly mass loss on the order of tens of billions of tons. 50 billion per month is a headline value you whisper before you say it out loud. It sounds wrong because it is wrong for what a small body should afford. Breathe in, breathe out, The room gets quiet the way it does when a card trick is about to be explained. But there's no magician here, only thermodynamics, geometry, and a line of numbers that keep writing themselves into a corner. Avi Loeb's style of sanity check hovers over the table. If what we see is what we think, does the accounting close? Treat the jet as thrust for a moment, not because we've decided on that story, but because thrust forces the calculus to reveal its spine. You don't need a science fiction engine to ask Newtonian questions. How much mass must exist per second, at what velocity, to maintain the observed column against solar pressure, and to produce even mild non-gravitational effects? Run it both ways: minimum exhaust speed for a given mass flow, minimum mass flow for a plausible exhaust speed. Whichever route you take, the curve bends toward appetite. It wants fuel the nucleus shouldn't have in that quantity for that long. So the community does the sober thing: pull levers that reduce the appetite, lower the duty cycle. Maybe the jet only looks continuous. Trim the column diameter. Perhaps we've overestimated the cross-section from glare. Push composition to CO2, and CO more efficient. Lighter molecules, lower latent heat per unit momentum in certain regimes. Spin models can help. If vents cluster and rotation aligns, brief sunlight windows might gate the flow in pulses that masquerade as a steady roar. What we see versus what should be possible. On paper, the deficit is not a cliff. It's a long slope that grows steeper the closer you get. Odds are, something in our assumptions is still too neat. Nature adores mess, instruments adore restraint, but even a mess must pay its bills. The longer the column holds with that particular geometry, the more uncomfortable the balance becomes. We return to basics: energy in, solar flux at distance r, modified by albedo and local topography; energy out, sublimation enthalpy, thermal re-radiation, and mechanical work of the jet. If we assume high porosity, subsurface pathways could concentrate flow with less heating. Efficient plumbing, not efficient magic. That buys us time, not solvency. If the nucleus is larger than we think, you get more reservoir, but the imaging constraints push back. If the active fraction is tiny but perfectly placed, you get elegance, not abundance. Silence moves through the lab like a tide. It's not defeat, it's respect. Our favourite explanations are stories about rivers we've mapped before. This river seems to rise uphill. Either we're standing on a tilted valley, or there's a pressure source we're misreading. The word non-gravitational acceleration slips into the chat with its usual caution tape. Comets drift from purely Keplerian paths all the time. Jets act like tiny hands. What matters is magnitude and direction. If the cumulative effect hints at sustained thrust along a preferred axis, the budget strains further, because thrust, even accidental, is expensive. And if the thrust vectors flirt with sunward alignment more often than chance supports, the narrative steps closer to a line we don't cross lightly. Breathe. Count to 5. Check the unit conversions. Start again. Math is the instrument. We are the noise. Someone in the back reminds us quietly that every anomaly is 2 stories. The sky and our hunger for pattern. We safeguard against wishful thinking by inviting its opposite. So we run the skepticism playbook with more devotion than the wonder one. Perspective illusion? Try alternate vantage reconstructions. Image processing artifact. Rebuild the pipeline independently and dare it to fabricate the same spear. Photometric overestimation? Cross-calibrate with different apertures, different nights, different telescopes. The column wavers in brightness but not in character. The budget, shaved at the edges, is still in debt. The phrase 50 billion tons a month keeps returning like a refrain we don't want stuck in our heads. Every time we say it, we insist on context. That's an order of magnitude map, not a final ledger. That's a stress test, not a verdict. But even an order of magnitude refrain can change a room. When a number is big enough, it becomes a smell. You can't pretend it isn't there. We hunt for relief in composition. If supervolatile CO2 dominates the early, spectra hint that it might then low-temperature sublimation could be doing more heavy lifting than water ever could, especially at distances where H2O sleeps. That's not a loophole, it's a lifeline. But even lifelines fray when pulled hard. High CO2 fractions explain the chorus. They don't explain the choir's discipline, nor the ledger's long deficit if the song keeps playing. Every few minutes, someone says it again like an oath. Where is the energy coming from? When a budget won't balance, You don't leap to magic. You re-examine the economy. There are economies inside ice we barely understand. Fractures that channel heat, capillaries that flash and reseal, pockets that detonate into order from chaos for longer than our models predict. There are economies outside IC, to the sun's electromagnetic weather, plasma environments that can shape a flow, shear layers that accidentally collimate like the throat of a nozzle. None of this is engine, yet combine enough small efficiencies, and the sky can cosplay as intent. If that is all this is nature, building a cathedral from scaffolds of coincidence, then the answer to our hook is humility. The energy is coming from the sun, as always, just moved through a maze more cleverly than we guessed. But humility has two directions. The other answer is riskier. The budget balances because there is a second revenue stream. Not supernatural, simply uncounted. A hidden store. A mechanism that taps environmental gradients more directly than sublimation does. A way to borrow pressure from the star instead of paying against it. We do not claim it. We do not need to. The value of a paradox is not in the label we slap on it, but in who we must become to resolve it. And yet, there's a heartbeat to the timing we can't ignore. December 19 waits like a sealed envelope on the desk. If the nucleus shatters, the budget collapses into familiar arithmetic. Big show, short life, no mystery, only a cautionary tale about our appetite for drama. If it holds, then every line we've written tonight requires a second draft with braver ink. Light is a ledger too. It records what is spent and what is merely transformed. The column keeps writing. We keep reading, slower now, careful with our breath so the page doesn't blur. Where is the energy coming from? The honest answer for the moment is the oldest sentence in science. We don't know yet. It's either dying or steering. Every image since the first sunward column has been a coin held between forefinger and thumb. We keep turning it, hoping the metal will confess which face is true. Nature is generous with endings. It loves to shred and scatter. Intention is sparing. It favors lines that hold. Our visitor stands between those stories, shimmering like heat over ice. If it's dying, the script is simple. Heat digs into fractures, pressure swells, and the body comes apart first in whispers of dust, then in bright syllables, then in a sentence of debris that writes itself across the heliosphere. If it's steering, the script is slower and stranger. Geometry acquires memory. The column is not a tantrum but a habit. Vectors repeat. The light learns a rhythm and refuses to forget it. We breathe with the data. In, out. The coin has not flipped yet. To choose between futures, we begin by telling each one honestly. In the disintegration story, physics is a patient sculptor. The nucleus is an old cathedral of voids and grains. Sunlight does not merely warm, it negotiates. Pockets of CO2 awaken first, then deeper layers, then a choir of vents whose harmonies sometimes masquerade as discipline. For days or weeks, the show can look like a purpose, because coincidence wears a tidy face at scale. But the entitlement of heat grows. A crucial seam lengthens. The chorus loses pitch. A bright outburst arrives with a cruel aftertaste. Fragments. The column frays into plural, then plural into dust. The light dims as the bank account approaches zero. If it's dying, the sky should loosen its grip. We scan for precursors, the fine snow that hints at a coming tear, the phase change where brightness becomes ragged, the moment a single saturated pixel blooms too quickly to be a steady jet and too slowly to be a cosmic blink. Survival has a tempo. So does collapse. Telescopes become stethoscopes pressed against a chest of stone and gas. We listen for arrhythmia. The intense story begins with a different posture. In it, geometry keeps returning to itself. The sunward column doesn't just happen, it recurs, not as a duplicate nature despises photocopies, but as a theme stated in variations. One night, the spear is broad at the base, the next it is narrow and long, but its bearing refuses to wander the way chance demands. Spin couples to outflow in a way that favors one plane over others. Environmental shears assist instead of sabotaging. The result is a personality, and personality is the most dangerous thing we can project onto rock. Still, the mathematics of repetition is hard to ignore. If it's steering, the sky should tighten its grip. The column should fold itself into efficiency, learning the minimal shapes that hold against pressure. You would expect small corrections, not theatrical reinventions enough to counter drifts, not enough to announce a full engine. Even non-gravitational whispers can leave footprints if you dust the floor properly. We start dusting. Both stories ask for humility. Only one asks for nerve. Between the futures, December 19 stands like a gate. If the object is going to fail, proximity will hasten the verdict. The star is a sieve that sorts pretense from structure. If the object is going to endure, proximity is an apprenticeship in surviving attention. Either outcome is information. Both are tests of our patience. We play out the disintegration arc in concrete terms. Imagine a seam opening on the nucleus night side. As rotation brings it into day, a sudden pressure drop vents a curtain of CO2. The column appears to choose the sun only because the seam is oriented that way by accident. Over hours, pressure undermines the seam's shoulders. The curtain turns ragged. A brighter outburst follows a delamination event, a wedge of crust separating. The light curve spikes, then sags asymmetrically, as chunks spin off and present inconsistent faces to the star. Within days, integrated brightness falls. The object returns to anonymity, a bruised smear of reflected light, dragging a wide, soft tail, a head without a voice. The sky breathes out. Our models breathe easier. We add a footnote to nature's talent for imitation. Now rehearse the steering arc. Keep the sunward column coherent across changing star angles. Let the rotation precess gently, but keep the jet's favored axis in frame. Allow variability, real environments breathe, but compare successive nights and find the same backbone in the noise. Look for the subtle migration in apparent position that could be explained by sustained microthrust integrated over days. Not a spaceship arcing grandly, but a pebble refusing to drift where it should. The light curve, instead of spiking into chaos, undulates like a practiced breath. The column's base does not wander wildly around the nucleus. It pivots within a preference. We can fake either in our heads. The discipline is to let the sky decide. The suspense is binary. The heart is not. People gather around screens for different reasons. Some crave the relief of collapse comfort in a world where the strange bows to thermodynamics and leaves us with a cleaner map. Others crave the wound of endurance, the thrill of standing near a possibility that can't be safely shelved. Both cravings are honest. Both can distort the lens. So we put guardrails on our desire. We write our rules in the margins. Assume error first. Cross-check images from independent teams. Welcome phrases like insufficient baseline and instrumental bias as friends, not insults. Do not reward the more romantic story with more oxygen than its evidence can breathe. Do not punish the more frightening story because it makes sleep shallow. Keep the motifs light. Silence, memory, breath, not as decorations, but as disciplines. Light is the accountant. Silence is the auditor. Memory is the ledger. Breath is how we count. A future is not chosen. It is revealed by what refuses to blink. In practice, the fork narrows to a hinge. Coherence. If coherence decays, we are looking at a beautiful dying. If coherence strengthens or persists absurdly long, we are looking at a behavior that isn't content to be called a coincidence. Coherence is expensive in the wild. That's why songs tame us. Pattern in a noisy room. So we watch for the places where pattern pays its bill. Phase-locked pulses as spin and sunlight align, a repeated angle that can't be chalked up to seeing conditions, a tail that continues to contest radiation pressure with fewer excuses every night. We also watch for the betrayal, a sudden bloom of off-axis debris, a bifurcation that spreads instead of focuses, a crown of fragments sparkling like a negative halo around the head. One image can mislead, 10 can seduce, 20 begin to write prose. The coin warms between finger and thumb. We don't flip it yet. Out there, nothing is pausing for our nerves. The object crosses space with a dignity that refuses our timelines. Inside, our rooms smell like coffee and ozone. Someone leans back and names the two futures without flourish. Disintegration or intent. No. Third path? Maybe. But the middle road has a habit of collapsing into one of the shoulders as data accumulates. Ambiguity is a season, not a climate. We are not judges. We're witnesses. The difference is humility. A judge desires a verdict. A witness desires truth. So we withhold the verdict and court repetition. We crave boring nights that keep choosing the same nearly impossible geometry, or loud nights that finally admit the body is coming apart. Either is mercy. And then the pivot, said softly, so it doesn't scare the moment away. If it survives, the questions change. Survival would not prove intention, but it would demand a reckoning with persistence. You cannot keep a spear pointed into a furnace without either exquisite luck, repeated indecently often, or an economy of forces more cunning than we've modelled. In either case, our story expands. Its dying is a conclusion. Its steering is a hypothesis. Its surviving is an invitation. Light keeps writing. We keep learning to read without skipping to the last page. The breath we've been pacing with the sky becomes steadier. The silence stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like attention. The coin is still in our hand. December 19 is still the gate, but the path toward it has already changed us, because suspense is not just about the outcome. It's about the clarity you earn by standing calmly between futures and letting neither own you. If Oumuamua was a whisper, this one is screaming. We didn't hear the first visitor until it was already leaving an afterimage slipping down a hallway we hadn't lit. Oumuamua arrived like a rumour, moved like a decision, and denied us the comfort of a tale or a coma. It was all angles and glints and an acceleration that didn't fit cleanly inside our cupboards. By the time we built a better question, the answer had vanished beyond the door. Then came Borisov, loud in a different register. A classic-flavoured comet, generous with dusty disclosure. The first interstellar traveller we could study as if it were a local. It soothed the part of us that wanted alien to mean familiar, simply shipped from farther away. If Oumuamua made us doubt our vocabulary, Borisov let us conjugate again without stuttering. And now this 3i, Atlas standing somewhere between them and also apart, like a chord that resolves but lands in a new key. It brings the generosity of brightness, the relief of data, and then ruins that relief with geometry that refuses to play background. If the first was absence, and the second abundance, this is abundance performing intent. Light, silence, memory, breath. We pace ourselves through the pattern. The sky doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. We line them up on the table like 3 stones we've carried from different rivers. Oumuamua, too clean, too quiet, too unwilling to wear a halo. Borisov, textbook, tender, a reminder that interstellar snow can still melt like a hymn we know by heart. Atlas, luminous and wrong in a way that feels personal, the kind of wrong that asks us to come closer instead of backing away. We draw the first mirror. Visibility. We missed the whisper until it was retreating. We caught Borisov before perihelion, enough to build calendars around. With Atlas, we are not only early, we're entangled chat windows glowing, instruments listening, schedules bending toward a date that keeps breathing louder. Progress, yes, but preparedness is more than earlier notice. It's readiness to accept what earlier notice reveals. The second mirror, behaviour. Oumuamua's defiance lived in subtraction. No coma, no jets we could see, but motion we could measure, tilting beyond gravities, clean grammar. Borisov's comfort lived in addition photons, dust, spectra, a tale that made sense of its own light. Atlas borrows both patterns and then breaks them. It offers plenty of photons, then arranges them into a sunward spear that feels like an argument. We study the rhyme scheme and feel our pulse climb. This is what pattern recognition does to a body. It narrows the world to a contour, and then asks if the contour is a doorway or a cliff. We weren't ready last time. Are we now? Readiness is not just telescopes warmed and algorithms hungry. It's the culture around them, what we allow ourselves to see when the sky stops flattering our assumptions. Back in 2017, we rushed to label the absence odd but natural, and moved on with a mixture of humility and relief. With Borisov, we wrote the steadier paragraphs we'd wanted to write the first time. Chemical notes, dust sizes, a gentle exhale of expertise. Now the alarm is subtler. It's not volume, it's pitch. A column leaning into the sun isn't chaos. It's choreography. And choreography invites a word we cradle with tongs. Intent. Not because we want it, wanting, is a bias we treat like static, but because ignoring the geometry would be a different bias in a lab coat. We test our nerves against both histories. Imagine swapping their positions. Had Oumuamua displayed a modest, persistent sunward jet and a measurable non-gravitational nudge, we would still be arguing about how hard to breathe. If Borisov had hurled a disciplined spear against the star, it would have rewritten our cheerful paragraphs in a darker ink. And here we are, with a third object doing the very thing that forces clarity. It creates an image you can't unsee. Alarm, handled well, is not panic. It's attention sharpened by stakes. Stakes are not doom, they're responsibility. The responsibility now is twofold. First, do not romanticize a spear of light into a banner for a story you already like. Second, do not anesthetize the spear into a glitch because the story it suggests scares you to sleep. We ask the laboratory questions again. Spectral signatures, mass flow estimates, sunward pressure balances. Then we ask the human ones. Are we braver listeners than we were in 2017? Are we more agile storytellers than we were in 2019? Do we know how to hold a possibility without breaking it with either cynicism or credulity? Memory answers carefully. Back then, our conversation was quicksand, every step a little sink, every argument a rescue that left footprints. Now, the ground is firmer. New surveys keep their eyes wider. Protocols exist for rapid cross-checks. A generation of students learn to speak anomaly without flinching. We are, in measurable ways, less surprised by surprise. But readiness has a final exam, and the test is not whether you own better instruments, it's whether you can tell the truth when truth arrives disguised as misbehavior. What we learned from a whisper and a song has prepared us for a shout. Whisper. We learned not to mock the data just because it denies our favorite visuals. A shard without a halo taught us that absence is not an apology. It's a teacher with fewer words and more homework. Song. We learned to luxuriate in detail without numbing curiosity. Borisov sang the old melody beautifully. We didn't let familiarity lull us. We listened differently because we had been stung by quiet once. Shout. Now we're asked to reconcile generosity with defiance. Atlas gives us light in abundance, then arranges it into an argument. The breathwork we practiced the in, out of restraint will matter most here. We inhale. All the reasons nature might build a temporary spear and keep it tidy longer than we expected. We exhale, inventories that don't close, coherences that refuse to fray, and the mirror slides into place. We weren't ready last time. Are we now? Ready means having enough humility to say we don't know yet without scoring it as a failure. It means loyalty to the slow accumulation of nights, the discipline of letting 20 images write prose where one only shouted poetry. It means resisting the algorithmic urge to round strange into safe. It means building questions that survive the answer no, and still point to value. If we are ready, then December 19 is not a stage for certainty. It's a clearing for clarity. If the object tears itself into a halo of ordinary, we will edit our alarm into gratitude and write a cleaner physics of how spears pretend to be choices. If it persists, if the column keeps leaning into the furnace with repeated grace, then we will earn the next conversation. Not what is it, but how. And how long, and what else does that imply? Light keeps a double-entry book. In one column, brightness, in the other, meaning. We've been burned by transferring too much from one to the other. The lesson from the whisper and the song is balance. The lesson from the shout might be courage. Silence helps. It always has. Not the silence of denial, but the kind that lets the signal breathe. Between uploads and hot takes, there is a gap where careful minds inhale. In that pause, memory organizes itself, makes ledgers from flashes, turns astonishment into craft. So we stand in the middle of three visitors like a tripod of experiences. The first taught us to pay attention before we are ready. The second taught us to love detail without shrinking from difference. The third is teaching us to be calm inside the siren, hands steady, breath even, eyes honest. If Oumuamua was a whisper and Borisov a song, Atlas is a voice that stands too close and asks a simple, dangerous question. Do you hear me now? We do. And hearing is the beginning of responsibility. The tail is fighting, the Sunday tails are supposed to surrender. They're the handwriting of defeat, dust and gas pushed outward, a pale road unfurling away from heat. But the column we keep watching does not retreat like a rumour. It leans into the light, steady as a spear lifted against a current. If geometry is language, this sentence is not passive. It argues. We begin with lines and forces. Radiation pressure wants to comb everything outward, turning chaos into a slow curl that hides its turbulence inside softness. The solar wind adds another push, a steady breath that should smear structure into fan and veil. Yet the jet shows a narrow spine, as if collimated like a flow that has learned its own throat. The more we measure, the more the room tilts toward suspicion. Nature rarely maintains a straight line unless something keeps paying for it. Light, silence, memory, breath. We return to the motifs not to decorate, but to think. Light traces shape. Silence helps us hear what shape implies. Memory reminds us where we've seen order before. Breath keeps us from running ahead of the evidence. We map angles frame by frame. Baseline stars give us a grid. The nucleus drifts across it like a small disobedient planet. The column's bearing is measured against the sun vector not once, but night after night. It wobbles, yes. Nothing alive in space is still, but the average keeps returning to a preference that makes our shoulders tense. You could call it a coincidence for a while. Then coincidence becomes a habit. And habit is where discomfort begins. What keeps a river straight in a storm built to bend it? We audition the innocent culprits. Maybe spin couples with vent geometry to favor a repeating orientation, hotspots that face the star at similar phases, releasing flow into a corridor carved by rotation. Maybe the plasma environment is doing more work than we credited. Magnetic draping, shaping charged dust and gas into a sheath that mimics intention for longer than our back of the envelope tolerates. Perhaps the jet isn't as straight as our brains insist. Perception sharpening a tangled rope into a spear because our eyes adore edges. Each may buy time, none buys peace. We zoom into the column's base. In some frames, it swells into a small bowl before narrowing. In others, it emerges in a clean, thin filament that thickens downstream where pressure lets it. Both behaviors are compatible with a nozzle-like effect, natural or otherwise. We are allergic to the or otherwise, so we keep scrubbing it from our sentences. Still, the physics of throat and expansion keep sitting in the front row, waving. Silence is useful here, not the performative kind that hides a conclusion, but the real quiet that slows cognition until lazy answers evaporate. In that quiet, a line remains, a tale that refuses to be a tale. Natural chaos versus navigational symmetry. Chaos is generous with beauty. It can throw up arcs and braids and spirals that look designed, then snatch them back with a shrug. But the character of chaos is volatility. It pulses, it branches, it doesn't hold still for long. Symmetry, by contrast, is expensive in wild systems. When we find it, we ask who's paying. On the screen, the column keeps picking itself up after small insults, seeing conditions, gusts in the solar wind, angle changes with rotation, and returning to alignment, like a metronome rediscovering tempo after a skipped beat. A navigational symmetry would look like this, we think, and then immediately correct ourselves. Careful. That sentence is baited. Don't take it unless the hook is steel. So we quantify straight. We measure deviation from the solar vector over time, run statistics against randomized vent models, fold in plausible spin rates, and let the Monte Carlo chew. We compare against historical jets that look tidy for a night and then blew apart. We do not find a smoking gun. That's the trap. Conviction without a bullet. What we do find is a reluctance to fray. Directional forces assemble around our analysis, like quiet planets. There's radiation pressure, of course. The constant outward shove. There's the Lorentz nudge on charged dust interacting with the solar magnetic field, sometimes corralling flows along transient corridors. There's the pressure gradient inside the coma itself, a local weather that can channel outflow. None alone explains a sun-facing column that stays coherent and keeps refinding the sun as if it were a north. Together, they sketch a possibility space in which a straight line can survive a little longer than intuition grants. But our column is not surviving at all. It is persisting. Breathe in. Count 4. Breathe out. Count 4. The cadence helps when the calculus won't be rushed. A voice in the back of the room reads the mirror aloud. Natural chaos versus navigational symmetry. We underline verses and then hesitate. The verses may be false. We could be staring at nature, discovering, through the geometry of stress and fracture, a near-symmetric outflow that keeps looking deliberative. That's the neighborly interpretation, the one that lets us sleep. Yet even in that version, the lesson is radical. The sky can accidentally build nozzles good enough to imitate guidance across nights. Another voice, calmer, not louder, asks the impolite version. If you wanted to keep a small body steady against a star's shove without broadcasting extravagance, what would you do? You would pick a composition that wakes early and breathes efficiently. You would arrange vents so that spin and sunlight line up to maintain a preferred axis more often than chance. You would let the environment assist you, leaning into fields and flows rather than fighting them. You would accept small wobbles as the cost of subtlety, and your light would look like this. We do not endorse the impolite version, we do not banish it either. Scientific discomfort is not a sign of error. It is the cost of staying honest when geometry leans towards stories it has no right to demand. A straight line in a crooked wind asks for either luck on repeat or a will. We interrogate luck on repeat. Over n nights, what's the probability that event configuration, plus spin, plus field alignment, keeps the column within a few degrees of the sun vector more often than noise predicts? The number is not vanishing. It is small enough to make a room feel narrow. That narrowness is the architecture of suspicion. It lowers the ceiling, brings the walls close, and makes every cough sound like a verdict. But suspicion isn't a conclusion. It's a posture that forces better work. So we design a harsher test. If the column fights radiation pressure, then small shifts in its axis should correlate with measured changes in outflow. Brightness, more brightness when it leans a hair closer to the sun, less when it yields. We look for that coupling. The data teases, then demurs. Not enough cadence yet. Well, need more nights. We keep our nerve by writing insufficient baseline 3 times like a spell against premature law. Meanwhile, the image persists. A jet pointing backward. It is such a simple phrase that it threatens to seduce. We protect ourselves with details. Backward relative to the sun, not to motion. Jet as a shorthand for collimated outflow, not proof of engine. Pointing is a snapshot verb that hides the movie under it. The act of precise speech is a moral practice. It keeps the imagination from smuggling in certainties. And yet, the human mind is a mirror. It reflects what it has seen before. We have seen symmetry in navigational contexts, rockets, plasma thrusters, laboratory jets, learning coherence through constriction. The echo is unnerving. The echo is not evidence. It is an alarm clock that wakes the part of us trained to notice when a line persists where a cloud should be. Light continues to be our accountant. It writes a ledger in gradients and edges. Silence stays our auditor. It tells us when we're filling gaps with wishes. Memory is the bookkeeper who keeps bringing old cases from the shelf. Other objects, other nights, warnings about patterns that looked like choice and turned out to be weather. Breath is the metronome that holds us inside the tempo of truth. Where does this leave us? On a narrow bridge between 2 honest lands. On one side, nature, inventing a transient order out of fractures and fields, teaching us that chaos can improvise a straight line for longer than we bet. On the other hand, navigation without confession, a small body husbanding momentum with a symmetry so disciplined it can pretend to be chance. Neither land has claimed us. The bridge is the work, the tail is fighting the Sunday. That sentence will not let go. Either the fight is theatre, the elegant accident of spins and seams, or its strategy. Suspicion is the correct response to such a sentence. So is restraint. We can hold both. We must. We've never seen a comet do this, but maybe nature is stretching. Begin with discipline. Before we let suspicion rename geometry as intention, we give nature every courtesy. The universe owns 1,000 tricks we've only glimpsed. Many of them wear ordinary clothes, just arranged in impolite ways. Start with composition. If CO2 dominates early hints, suggest it does, then sublimation can ignite far from the warmth that wakes water ice. Carbon monoxide can join the choir, a supervolatile that breathes in cold light. At certain heliocentric distances, these ices outperform H2O, exhaling with enthusiasm that looks almost theatrical. A crust layered by time, dust mantles above, volatile pockets below can act like a reluctant lid. Pressure builds. When a seam opens, flow erupts through a narrow throat. No intelligence required, only plumbing. Now, add topography. Imagine a canyon on the nucleus, subsurface porosity, feeding into a cleft that behaves like a nozzle. Geometry funnels chaos into a column, the way wind finds a tone in a bottle. Spin turns the nozzle through sunlight on a schedule that favors repetition. If you catch the show at the same phase on successive nights, you'll swear at purpose. What you're seeing is a machine built by fracture and freeze, not by hands. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while we test the hope. Thermal processes help. Amorphous ice transitioning to crystalline can exothermically donate heat, a little bonus that extends a jet's life. Sintering at the rim of a vent can stiffen the throat, resisting erosion long enough to keep the column tidy. Recondensation at night might recharge a pocket, the way frost returns to a window before dawn. None of this violates the syllabus. It's the advanced section of the same class. Before we say engine, we should exhaust every corridor of physics. The sun's environment lends a hand, sometimes literally. Magnetic draping around the coma can corral charged dust and molecules, guiding them along field lines that briefly mimic scaffolding. The solar wind is not a uniform breeze. It's a quilt of speeds and densities, threaded with sector boundaries and current sheets. A jet encountering the right shear can sharpen, much as a river's edge straightens where fast meets slow. Electrostatic charging can loft fine grains and favour particular exits. Even the coma's own pressure gradients can herd flow into a spine. Perspective rescues us from our own eyes. Apparent sunward can be a trick in 3 dimensions, an outflow angled in space that, when flattened onto our line of sight, leans toward the star. Anti-tail illusions have embarrassed us before. Dust sheets aligned with Earth's orbital plane that look like backward tails while obeying the same outward push as always. If a thin, bright sheet overlaps a true jet, the composite can impersonate a spear, especially under aggressive contrast. So we do the honest work. Alternate vantage modelling, synthetic projections, coma hydrodynamics under magnetic boundary conditions, vent ensembles on plausible spin states. We are not trying to win an argument. We are trying to keep the argument worthy of the sky. Breathe. Let the silence clear the chalkboard. Then write the next line. Now the strain begins. Because each explanation works for a night. The nozzle holds for a few rotations, then should erode. The field geometry aligns across a sector, then should wander. The perspective trick fools us in this exact configuration, then should fail as the phase angle changes. Yet the column persists with a personality that keeps reappearing like a refrain we didn't compose. How long can coincidence pay the rent on coherence? Run the energy budget under our most generous assumptions. Let CO2 carry the load. Let the duty cycle shrink. Let the jet be narrower than it looks. Let the dust be large enough to resist radiation pressure longer than intuition grants. The deficit shrinks. It does not evaporate. And coherence has its own cost. A throat that stays tidy should either widen as it erodes or clog and detonate. When neither happens for nights on end, we're not at a verdict, we're at a raised eyebrow. We look for the graceful failure modes nature prefers. Pulse trains as spin gates, sunlight, quasi-periodic brightening, as valves open and reseal, braided filaments that win and lose against the solar wind in minutes. Atlas gives us some of this texture, but beneath it, a stubborn spine keeps rediscovering the star. It is not a ruler, it is a habit. Thermal models begin to fray where behavior refuses to randomize. The more carefully we treat porosity and latent heat balances, the more we are forced to accept that the system must be exquisitely tuned to keep performing the same trick. Tuning can happen by accident. Fracture networks can self-organize, but self-organization is usually local and transient. Here, locality survives a changing sky. Transience overstays. Caution is not denial. It's fidelity to possibility space. We resist the soft poison of certainty. Unknown mechanism is not a synonym for intention. It's a space we earn the right to inhabit by throwing away lazy answers. We list the remaining honest contenders. Exotic, volatile dominance. CO. CO. 2 mix with unusual pore geometry, enabling sustained, collimated outflow. Magneto-hydrodynamic shaping. Solar wind shear plus magnetic draping. Organizing the jet longer than typical. Perspective harmonics. Time-varying line-of-sight effects, conspiring with rotation to fake constancy. Electrostatic sorting. Size-charge coupling selects grains that behave as if herded. Subsurface recharge. Night-side recondensation, feeding a pressure reservoir in repeatable cycles. Each entry wears a caveat. Sustained becomes the splinter in the sentence. Constancy is the grit. They explain the spear. They do not explain the spear's refusal to forget the Sunday breathe in, breathe out. Say the quiet part with care. We arrive at the pivot, like hikers reaching a ridge at dusk. The landscape you are prepared to defend is still real riven, with gullies of plausible physics, dotted with the cairns of prior comets that fooled us briefly. But on the other side of the ridge, a valley appears that your map does not name. You do not run to it. You mark it. You allow it to exist without rushing a bridge. There is a point at which stretching becomes breaking. Nature can stretch the syllabus. Unusual ices, accidental nozzles, friendly fields, flattering geometry, stretch too far, and the promise of randomness is right to be messy. It starts to break under the weight of a line that keeps recentering itself on the Sunday. If the column's coherence survives perihelion changes, if its bearing prefers the star across rotating frames, if its brightness couples to axis corrections in ways hard to ascribe to weather alone, then our catalogue of almosts becomes a museum of polite excuses. Breaking is not a scandal, it's an invitation. It doesn't force an exotic conclusion, it forces better questions. What environmental gradients could be tapped more directly than sublimation? What feedback could steer outflow with minimal expenditure? Could a body leverage the star's own pressure, riding it like a sailor tacks against wind, no engine, just geometry with intention-like results? If the answer is yes, we've discovered a class of natural sailing we didn't know to test. If the answer is no, we're nearer the threshold where navigation, not weather, writes the line. Light does what it always does, it writes. Silence does its part, it removes the words we can't source. Memory holds the ledger, where we were generous, where we conceded, where we simply said we don't know. Breath keeps the tempo from running away. We are still inside the vow of caution. We haven't declared the spear a will. We have honoured every corridor nature could plausibly walk to reach this geometry and linger there. And we have felt the floorboards creak beneath our feet. We've never seen a comet do this, but maybe nature is stretching. If the stretch survives the next test's unchanged, then the sentence must be rewritten. Maybe nature isn't stretching anymore. Maybe a rule is broken. If this is exhaust, then we're looking at something with a destination. Start from the unromantic centre of all motion. Newton doesn't care about our feelings. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. If mass leaves a body in a preferred direction, the body responds with a whisper of recoil, small, steady, cumulative. If the column we've been watching is more than weather, if it's momentum leaving in a sunward stream, then the nucleus is answering with its own faint sentence, written not in light but in trajectory. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while we enter speculation with our shoes still tied. We frame the question like an engineer forced to be humble. What thrust vector would a sunward jet deliver? Outflow angle toward the star pushes the body away from it. The magnitude depends on mass flow rate, mr.m, exhaust speed, vev, eve, and geometry. The thrust is T equals MERV T equals .mv ET equals MERV adjusted by the cosine of misalignment. For a rubble ice object with plausible CO2, vent speeds hundreds of meters per second, perhaps a kilometer per second in the best-throated case, the numbers don't need to be cinematic to matter. A few millinewtons over days become a nudge you can measure if your instruments have patience. A whisper of push, integrated over time, becomes a shove you feel in ephemerides. We start with a conservative ledger. Suppose the mass flow inferred from brightness is wrong by a factor of a few fine. Be unkind to the hypothesis. Suppose exhaust speed is modest. Suppose duty cycle is low. Even then, the integrated impulse across nights at near-sun distances could produce non-gravitational acceleration. Tiny, yes, but not rhetorical. And if the column keeps refinding sunward, then the vector is not wandering uselessly. It is writing a preferred direction into the math. We check ourselves the way adults check a locked door twice. Could anticipated sublimation produce the same class of drift without invoking propulsion at all? Of course. Comets do it every season. The difference is symmetry. Typical jets are weather. They average out into a soft bias that tracks surface chaos. A disciplined, sun-facing flow would not average out. It would stack. Breathe in. Breathe out. Write the next line only if you can show your work. We're not after cinematic claims. We are after Newtonian symmetry, force, counterforce, alignment that refuses to be decorative. If the object resists radiation pressure with a collimated sunward stream, its effective acceleration points roughly anti-sunward. The orbital fit should notice small deviation from a gravity-only ephemeris, unfolding as a clean component along the sun-object line, not a flare, a hum. If the light is a ledger of exhaust, the orbit will become a receipt. This is where dread-tinged awe enters not horror, not hope, but the vertigo that arrives when equations begin to feel like intention. Because thrust vectors are choices, even in machines that don't think. A nozzle doesn't have a philosophy. It has an axis. Keep the axis steady, and you keep the story steady. If the axis keeps pointing where the star lives, the net push points away from the star. That isn't a suicide note. It's a method. We are careful with verbs. We do not say steering. We say net acceleration, consistent with a persistent momentum flux. We do not say engine. We say exhaust-like behavior. Naming is a guardrail when ore tries to climb over. Imagine a minimal architecture that could create this picture without violating parsimony. Vents that open along a narrow corridor. A spin that keeps that corridor favorably illuminated. Baffles formed by fracture that act like crude throats. A composition that wakes early CO2, to provide cold working flow, a plasma environment that polishes the outflow into a cleaner line than it deserves. None of that is miraculous. But together, it becomes a machine in the lowercase sense, a mechanism which, when seen from a distance, rhymes with propulsion. Silence arrives to audit our enthusiasm. Is there a directional coupling between column brightness and orbital residuals? Do slight brightening episodes precede or accompany small shifts in the along-sun component of non-gravitational acceleration? If yes, we have a feedback signature. More exhaust, more push. If not, our romance is showing. We mark the questions, not the answers. A vector implies a destination even when none is intended. It's a subtle cruelty of physics. A repeated push, however small, sketches a path. We can ask what kinds of destinations accidental thrust would incidentally produce. Anti-sunward nudges raise perihelion distance over time, alter the timing of node crossings, and can bias the outbound asymptote. If the column persists post-perihelion, the push could shepherd the body toward a slightly different outbound aim than gravity alone would grant. Not a new star on purpose, just a new forever. But if this were more than weather, if the outflow were leveraged rather than merely suffered, then intent could hide inside restraint. You wouldn't burn extravagantly, you'd surf. You'd use the star's pressure like a sailor uses wind, tacking with microbursts to hold attitude. Your signature would be small, consistent, unspectacular, and infuriatingly hard to rule out with a short baseline. We are not saying this is what we see. We are saying the light invites us to check. Memory brings other cases off the shelf. Non-gravitational, a 1, a 2, a 3 terms fit comets every year, along radial, along transverse, and normal to the orbital plane. Most fits waggle around 0, with the radial component dominating when activity is high. If our fits for this object asked for a sustained radial term, aligned anti-sunward more than chance predicts, and if that term survived model changes like a stubborn melody, then the propulsion hypothesis earns oxygen. Not victory, oxygen. We break the idea on purpose. Could dust-size distributions fake the same residuals by altering radiation pressure coupling? Could asymmetric outbursts offset one another to impersonate continuity? Could processing pipelines nudge centroids in ways that pretend to be dynamics? The answer to all three is, they could, briefly. But briefness is the enemy of a vector. Vectors like time. Dread is not an argument. It's a reminder to double-check the math. Awe tempts us to narrate beyond the data. Dread tempts us to shut the window and pretend the night is smaller. Restraint holds both by the collar. We revive our motifs as method. Light traces the putative exhaust. Silence forces us to remove adjectives we can't defend. Memory keeps a clean log of every assumption we adjusted. Breath paces the tempo so we don't sprint where the terrain drops. Now, admit the human sentence hiding under the calculus. If this is exhaust, then someone or something has learned to speak Newton in a grammar we recognize. That recognition is the dread flavor in the awe. We know what disciplined exhaust looks like because we make it. We also know how minimal it can be when elegance is the goal. The most effective thrust is the kind you almost miss. So we set a test suite on the table like cutlery before a difficult meal. Track the along-sun residual across an extended arc. Look for phase-locked coherence with column behavior. Compare pre- and post-perihelion fits. Does the sign or magnitude of the radial term map to brightness? Examine nights with different solar wind regimes. If the vector survives environmental chaos, promotion is warranted. Search for microasymmetries in the coma, consistent with reaction torque. Thrust should impart spin changes if not perfectly balanced. None of this guarantees an answer. All of it guarantees well-deserved one if it comes. Breathe in. Count 5 breatheth out. Count 5. Let the dread thin until awe has room to think. Because if this is exhaust, then we are indeed looking at something with a destination, even if that destination is accidental, even if the pilot is fractured and sunlight. And if it is not exhaust, if the column is a virtuoso of natural plumbing alone, then we have still learned to read geometry as a language capable of implying will without possessing it. Either way, the script we carry past December 19 will be heavier, not with certainty, but with responsibility. To build instruments and habits that can tell a weathered jet from a chosen vector, to keep our nouns honest, to stay inside, the small courage of saying, not yet until now earns itself. Light keeps writing, silence keeps editing, memory keeps the ledger. Breath keeps us human in a room that suddenly feels very large. One day, one verdict, a shattered comet, or a controlled object. Time has a texture when a date becomes a hinge. Hours don't pass, they gather. Every telescope schedule is a stack of promises. Every cancelled meeting is a silent confession that we're already living in the after. December 19 isn't a line on a calendar. It's a room we're all walking into at the same time, carrying questions like instruments we're not sure we deserve to play. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while the clock gets loud. Urgency is practical, not theatrical. We need cadence, tight photometry to catch subtle dips that might betray fragments, wide-field imaging to net a tail that begins to splay, spectroscopy to watch CO2 and dust ratio swing if vents fail or multiply. We need redundancy north and south, large apertures and small pro-arrays and backyard rigs with astonishing discipline. We need weather luck, hardware that doesn't blink, and hands steady enough to annotate chaos without becoming part of it. We print checklists the way sailors check knots. Look for coma asymmetry that suddenly blooms off axis. Watch for morphology bifurcation, a single spine that becomes 2, then 3, like a crown losing its teeth. Track rotational light curve drift. When a nucleus breaks, its period lies about how it used to be. Map polarization changes that whisper the grain size has shifted, a hint that the crust has come apart and the fine powder has taken the stage. If the column is a theatre, this is the moment the stagehands take over. If it's guidance, this is the moment the choreography refuses to dissolve. When rocks die, they confess in edges. When they live, they confess in rhythm. We brief new eyes with old scars. Disintegration doesn't arrive as a headline. It arrives as a punctuation error. One frame smudges. Another grows a shoulder. The head brightens too fast in a short exposure, then underperforms in the next. The signature of chunks that spin and flash. Inconsistent faces, turning to and from the Sunday. A dust fan thickens. A jet loses its throat. You don't call it until you must, but you learn to smell it, the way firefighters know heat through smoke. And if it survives, then the rhythm test matters more than the edge test. We look for coherence across changing phase angles, the column rediscovering sunward as geometry shifts hour by hour. We look for micro-corrections, tiny axis nudges that correlate with brightness pulses, as if the flow itself were trimming attitude. We look for post-perihelion stubbornness, no dramatic fade, no confession of exhaustion, just the audacity of persistence. Anyone can be weather. 3 in Company begins to look like a habit. Schedules tighten. You can hear it in the way we talk, in half sentences that assume the rest. A network of observers agrees on a rolling cadence so no hour goes dark. Someone volunteers the pre-dawn slot. Someone else covers the awkward noon break with a satellite feed and math. The plan is simple in spirit, complicated in practice. Do not blink. If the verdict arrives in a 5-minute tantrum, we intend to have eyes open when it does. The difference between panic and preparation is a checklist you trust. We line up the indicators like constellations we intend to memorize. Fragmentation indicators. Sudden multi-peaked cores, a string of pearls along track profile. Non-linear increases in afro that crash into a plateau. Stochastic swings in gas to dust ratios. Survival indicators. Stable centroid under changing seeing. Repeatable sunward alignment beyond luck. Shallow, consistent, non-gravitational residuals aligned. Anti-sunward, coma textures that repair themselves after environmental insults. Ambiguity traps. Seeing limited elongation pretending to be fragments. Anti-tail illusions during certain Earth object sun angles. processing halos that sharpen a mere gradient into a spear. We pin them on a board. We write evidence is not equal to conclusion above them like a ward against haste. The human stakes are quieter, but they push just as hard. Students pull a double shift and whisper that they might be present for a moment. They'll tell their kids about it. A retiree with a precision mount warms a thermos and agrees to keep a segment of sky awake. A few of us recalibrate our courage. We've promised to believe what arrives, not what we prefer. That too is a checklist. Meanwhile, the object refuses to narrate. It simply moves. We do the breathing for both of us. In measure, don't infer. Outflag, don't declare. The difference matters more near a verdict than anywhere else. Anticipation is a kind of listening that doesn't try to finish your sentence. The night approaches. Sensors hum. Code sits in watchful loops, ready to reject its own confidence if a hot pixel misbehaves. We've arranged things so the first images are processed while the shutter still cools from the second. This is not speed for its own sake. It's feedback, the ability to adjust exposure, binning, and cadence on the fly if the object decides to declare itself in a language we didn't expect. One day, one verdict. If it shatters, there will be grief, strange, disproportionate grief for a rock that never knew us. But really, it will be grief, for the question postponed. Well, write new physics for a spear masquerading as will, and the writing will be good work, the kind that raises the floor for everything that comes after. We will thank the sky for telling us no so clearly. We can build better yeses. If it endures, the air will change, not into certainty that isn't on offer, but into a sharper hunger. A column that keeps leaning into a furnace across geometry shifts, and time will ask for braver math. Well, have earned phase 2 of the debate. Not is it steering, but how far can natural plumbing pretend to steer, and what tests survive that pretense? Well, widen the campaign, and the question won't fit in one night anymore. That's what survival buys. More time to doubt well. Light, as ever, will keep the ledger. We are its clerks, pencils sharpened, erasers clean, breath steady. And the quiet? The quiet is not emptiness tonight. It's a crowd holding still. One day, one verdict. A shattered comet, or a controlled object. The truth, either way, is a gift, because pretending not to be waiting is a kind of dishonesty we can't afford near a hinge. It should be fading. It's not. Post-perihelion is where comets learn humility. The sun has taken its tax. The jets slacken. The coma loosens like a sigh. Light curves settle into decent slopes, and everyone goes home with a cleaner model. But this one, this stubborn visitor, treats the after as if it were the point. The column endures. The brightness declines like a conversation that refuses to hang up. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while the map stops cooperating. We prepared ourselves for a short coda. Debris drifting, outgassing dropping, geometry unbraiding into the ordinary. Instead, the first nights after the hinge bring more of the same sunward preference reasserted, the jet spine pulling itself together after small insults, morphology that looks less like a comet cooling down and more like a habit unwilling to retire. When a play should be in an epilogue, why are we still in Act 2? The numbers hate drama, so we dress them in plain clothes. Photometry first. The flux should step down at a rate our thermal models like, but it lingers just above that slope, as if refusing to descend on schedule. Spectra next. CO. Two features keep their nerve. The dust continuum doesn't slacken as quickly as grain escape models predict. Morphology last. The column remains coherent enough to require vocabulary. We'd hope to put away collimation, preferred axis, sunward bearing. We run the post-perihelion forgiveness checklist, every excuse the sky has ever offered to make persistence sound normal. Maybe rotation period changes have temporarily favored vent alignment. Maybe the nucleus rolled into a configuration that strengthens the throat of a long-lived seam. Maybe a phase angle trick is flattering the column, compressing its messiness into a cleaner line from our viewpoint. Those maybes buy respect, they don't buy surrender. And the ledger returns to the table. If the jet is still moving serious mass after peak heating, either the bank account was deeper than we thought, or some hidden economy is padding withdrawals. We are not claiming surplus energy. We are claiming that our arithmetic, which expected a polite taper, keeps being scolded by a number that lands just north of stop. Persistence isn't just brightness. It's personality. Brightness can deceive. Persistence of character is harder to fake. Most comets after the blaze lose adjectives. Their tails relax into the kind of beauty that doesn't argue. But here, the how matters as much as the how much. The column continues to refine the star like a compass pointer loosened by fatigue but not surrendered. The base of the jet still behaves like a throat, sometimes fat, sometimes fine, but always a throat. Even as the coma puffs and thins, a spine keeps threading the noise. We check ourselves by inviting counterexamples. Comet X produced a tidy jet for days after perihelion. Comet Y held a sunward sheet under a lucky phase angle. Comet Z's CO2 line outlived H2O by weeks. We line them up. We borrow their alibis. Then we compare their temperaments to this one and feel the gap open. Those cases were flickers, supported by parentheses. This reads like a sentence. Perihelion usually scrapes a body clean. Crusts spall, fissures widen, vents detune. In the aftermath, we expect morphology to wander, light curves to rag, rotations to lie. If anything, this object seems less chaotic in its afterphase than in its approach. The column's recentering looks practiced, not panicked. That is the source of the unease. Practice is a story we prefer to tell about organisms and machines, not about ice. Silence arrives to audit our anxiety. What if we are romanticizing steadiness? What if our cadence is too coarse to see the sloppiness between frames? So, we densify the schedule. We pull shorter exposures, finer bins, more aggressive deconvolution, but with independent pipelines that distrust each other on principle. The improvements do what honest improvements do. They erase some illusions and leave a sturdier, smaller miracle in place. The column wobbles more than we hoped. It wobbles less than chaos should. Memory brings us a different lens. Post-perihelion non-gravitational terms. Many comets show residual pushes that make sense as remnant activity. The radial term often flips sign around the sun, tempers, and then fades. We fit our arc, expecting contrition. The fit behaves like someone who heard the apology request and offered a nod without changing their stride. The radial component remains politely present, aligned where sunward exhaust would ask it to be. Not a shout, a hum. Breathe in, breathe out. Write carefully so the adjectives don't outrun the nouns. Theories start to feel like clothes we've outgrown and refuse to donate. Exotic volatiles with nozzle survives the afterphase better than most, but it strains. If erosion is inevitable, why hasn't the throat collapsed or broadened beyond recognition? Magnetoshear scaffolding can persist across sector boundaries, but the solar wind's mood swings have not eroded the preference the way we'd fear. Perspective can still dress disarray as order, but the angle has changed enough that the costume should no longer fit as well as it does. We are left with the uncomfortable middle truth. Nature is either stretching more than our models permit, or our models, in permitting less, have been too proud. When a visitor surpasses our expectations, it earns a better question. The better question is not engine or not, it is. What feedback loops can conserve coherence this long? A comet is a feedback organism in the small o sense. Heating changes shape. Shape changes outflow. Outflow changes torque. Torque changes spin. Spin changes heating. Most feedbacks erode discipline, but some can reinforce it, creating practical equilibria that look like practice. Could a seam's evolving geometry self-tune as ice subsides, keeping throat conditions close to optimal? Could recondensation at the rim harden just enough each night to repair what the day undid? Could the flow, interacting with the coma and the incident wind, find a lane that becomes easier to follow the longer it is followed? Those questions don't grant intention. They grant agency to physics in the sense that rivers have agency. They carve the valley that then guides them. If the column is a river, post-perihelion persistence says the valley has not collapsed. Either the walls are stronger than we guessed, or someone keeps shoring them up with the cheapest possible bricks. Geometry and timing. We test for consequences. If sustained outflow continues anti-sunward, the orbit's residuals should integrate into a cleaner signature, a patient bias rather than a tantrum. If the jet's base remains tight, the coma's polarization map should keep a certain texture. Grain sizes sorted in a way that tracks the discipline of the throat. If microcorrections in axis continue to accompany brightness pulses, phase locking between rotation and sun-facing preference might grow, not decay, as if the system had learned its song. None of these is proof. All of them are receipts if the light is a ledger, telling the same story across time. The perplexity is not noisy. It is quiet. It sits with us in the lab at 3A, while the after phase insists on being a phase, not an after. It tastes like a promise withheld. You can feel the philosophical gravity trying to pull nouns like steering across the table. We keep them on the shelf. The rules haven't changed. Name only what the data can carry. Let verbs earn themselves. Still, a sentence keeps circulating in the hallways, the kind you say under your breath to disarm it. It should be fading. It's not. What if we let that sentence work on us instead of against us? What if survivals like this are not anomalies, but previews what we will see more often when our cadence improves, when surveys stop blinking, when our reflex to domesticate strangeness has been trained into patience? Perhaps the sky has always allowed a few of its travellers to keep their posture after the close pass. We were simply too eager to pack up our instruments once the headline date had passed. Light keeps writing, unhurried. Silence keeps us from adding flourishes the prose doesn't need. Memory writes new margins in the models. Breath keeps our hands steady over keyboards that want to type verdicts. It should be fading. It's not. That's not a scandal. It's a syllabus extension. It didn't form near a star, maybe not in a system at all. Identity begins with chemistry. Most comets wear water like a passport stamp. H2O dominates the coma, with CO and CO2 as lively companions. But this visitor keeps flipping the ratios. The lines say, carbon dioxide is running the choir loud, sustained, shameless. 87%, give or take, where we expected water to lead. It's like meeting a comet that doesn't belong to the warm, familiar grammar of a sunlit nursery. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while the name comet loosens around the edges. If CO2 is this dominant, the ice inventory was written cold, very cold. Carbon dioxide condenses readily in deep freeze, but it doesn't like star near kitchens. A body with this bias likely grew far from a lamp, outskirts of outskirts territory, or drift-assembled clumps where starlight is rumour. Water can still be there, locked, quiet, shy, but the voice we hear isn't the water voice. It's carbon volatile, restless, lithe. What you're made of is a map of where you learn to breathe. We pull old frameworks from the shelf, clathrates, cages of water, ice trapping CO2 and CO at low temperatures. If the cages crack under heat, the captured gases erupt first, explaining early, strong CO2 jets far from perihelion. Amorphous to crystalline transitions. As amorphous H2O rearranges, it frees trapped volatiles, spiking CO2 without demanding a liquid phase. Layered accretion, pebbles built in cold shadow, stitched together with just enough dust to keep the pores talking. All of these can produce CO2, rich breath. None explains a personality where CO2 keeps calling the tune when water should be wide awake. At these distances now, post-perihelion, the water voice should be shouting. Instead, the carbon voice still carries across the hall. We whisper the uncomfortable question. What if comet is the wrong archetype? The object moves like one, displays a coma and jets, wears dust, but its identity resists our domestic categories. Maybe the icy relic of a planetary nursery story is true only in outline. Maybe this is a relic of a colder conversation, compiled at temperatures that make ordinary comet lore feel provincial. If carbon writes the melody, origin shifts from hearth to hinterland. Origins that fit a CO2, Tom-Aled composition. Trans-system outskirts, beyond the classical ice lines, where CO2 and CO freeze before water conducts the orchestra. Ejected cloud fragments. Debris flung from a forming system so early it never learned the water-dominant dialect. Intercloud condensation. Grains and ices assembled in the cold between stars, later compressed by gentle collisions until a loose body learned to hold itself together. That last phrase tugs at imagination. Assembled in the dark between stars. Not born of a disk, but of the drift chemistry that predated any particular sun. It's speculative, yes, but the CO2 dominance invites a wider map. The farther you get from a lamp, the more carbon steals the mic. Light does its honest job. It hands us spectra. Silence audits our excitement. CO2 can look loud if water is obscured. Dusty mantles muting H2, O lines, while CO2 vents through better plumbing. So, we check geometry, line depths, and thermal models. The correction trims enthusiasm, not identity. The carbon signature remains a flag planted in snow we don't visit often. Composition doesn't just tell you where, it tells you how the engine breathes. A CO2 dominant engine behaves differently under the sun's interrogation. CO2 wakes earlier, pushes harder in cold, and can jet efficiently through narrower throats. If the sustained sunward column is real, a carbon-led composition is suspiciously convenient. You get momentum without waiting for water to take over, and perhaps without inviting water's messier, dust-laden collapse that would quickly clog your nozzle. A carbon machine natural or engineered by fracture can run lean. Thermally, this fits our earlier discomforts. If heat budgets seemed overdrawn, a CO2, first jet, lowers the energetic invoice. If coherence overstayed, a CO2 AT-fed throat might resist the slurry that water-driven activity often generates. None of this declares intention. It declares a mechanism that lends itself to misinterpretation because it behaves like efficiency. Breathe in, breathe out. Name only what the data can carry. Identity is still confused. So we court wonder instead of a verdict. Wonder can hold uncertainty without collapsing into fiction. What does a high CO2 traveler mean? It means we have been biased by the comets we could easily study. Local, water-forward, polite to our tools and timelines. It means the interstellar sample may be broader than our first two postcards, implied one whisper, with too little to analyze, one song that fit our hymn book, and now a shout in a dialect we didn't practice. It means the chemistry of elsewhere is not obliged to rhyme with ours. If this body learned its recipe in the dark, then the dark is part of the recipe. Picture dust grains in a molecular cloud, kissed by CO and CO2 at tens of Kelvin, growing mantles in silence. A mild shock passes no supernova drama, just pressure waves. Clumps accrete, not as planets in waiting, but as drifters unclaimed, unaffiliated. Future vagrants of gravity. Eons later, one crosses a star's attention and behaves like it remembers who taught it to breathe. That memory isn't mystical, it's chemical. But chemical memory can look like personality when light reads it aloud. Maybe not in a system at all doesn't need to mean born in perfect isolation. It can mean educated by the interstellar medium before any curriculum from a disk could overwrite it. A pre-solar childhood, a post-stellar adolescence, a syllabus no one assigned. Our motifs return as a method. Light writes the carbon grammar on our detectors. Silence keeps us from drawing temples where there are only caves. Memory revises our map. We draw thicker borders around the hinterlands and write possible in the margins where we once wrote unlikely. Breath keeps the story human. We exhale bias, inhale patience. So the hook becomes a doorway. It didn't form near a star. Maybe not in a system at all. If that's the case, we are not just studying a traveller. We're studying the places between the chemistry of the void that is not void at all, the long cold where carbon learns to sing loudly without water's choir above it. And the sunward spear? The composition doesn't prove it. It permits it. CO2 makes a tidy column easier to sustain, making coincidence look more like choreography. If the verdict favours nature, well, upgrade our comet physics to include cold-born efficiency. If the verdict leans toward guidance, well, face a different astonishment. Someone chose a fuel that the dark provides for free. Either way, the anomaly is a gift. It expands the set of things a comet can mean, and with it, the set of places a life of chemistry can begin. If it's a scout, what's it scouting for? Caution first. The light gives us columns and hums. Our minds supply nouns. Still, there's a shelf in any honest inquiry labelled constructed scenarios, models, not claims useful because they force our questions to be sharper. If the geometry looks like guidance and the fuel looks like efficiency, what designs would make the least noise while doing the most work? Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence as we let the thought experiment breathe. Start with navigation. You don't fight the star, you use it. A body with vents arranged along a preferred axis could tack like a sailor. Short, disciplined spurts of outflow when the spin aligns. Coast when misaligned, repeat. Minimal impulse, maximal leverage. A deliberate craft would go further. Laminar conduits, baffles acting as throats. Shutters timed to rotation so the net vector stays anti-sun. It wouldn't look like fireworks. It would look like a habit. If you wanted to go unnoticed, you would make intention indistinguishable from weather. Energy harvesting next. A civilization allergic to waste would raid the environment first. The menu near a star is rich. Solar photons, classic, charged particles, solar wind, magnetic fields, draping and reconnection, and thermal gradients across the shadow and sun. A passive sail is obvious. A plasma sail is quieter, electrostatic or magnetic fields inflated around the body to grip the wind, trading power for thrust without bright exhaust. Or, invert the paradigm. Use carefully gated sublimation as your battery, converting sunlight into momentum at throat-limited efficiency. Choose CO2 not for romance, but because the dark stockpiles it and the sun wakes it clean. Relaying and recharging. A scout is never just a mover, it's a messenger. You'd want a geometry that doubles as an antenna spines, that can act as phased elements when charged. Conductive threads in the coma arranging themselves under timed fields. Recharging could be chemical, recondensation at night, electromagnetic harvesting current from plasma interactions, or radiative thin-film collectors that never announce themselves as panels in reflected light. A signature of such discipline would be repeatable posture. The body keeps returning to the same orientations that maximize both thrust and link quality. The quietest machines aren't shy. They're considerate. They refuse to be the drama. The philosophical oar slips in here, sideways. We know this grammar because we speak a toddler version of it. Sail, sip, send. We sketch those verbs in labs and patents. The idea that a small patient object could cross the gulfs by leaning into ambient fields is not magic. It's thrift. If something built this, it prized longevity over spectacle, maintenance over heroism, survivability over speed. It would not be here for applause. It would be here to last. Mirror time. Accidental visitor versus mapped probe. The accidental visitor is a vagrant of gravity, stitched by cold chemistry, shaped by weather, and useful precisely because it shows us what the universe can do without us. The mapped probe is an argument about attention, that someone else once needed a catalogue where we have a blank, a cross-check where we have a wish. One is the gift of happenstance, the other is the gift of intent. Both are gifts. The difference is how much of the future they obligate. Breathe, don't chase romance, check mechanics. A controlled model that respects parsimony would be small and stupid, by choice robust, not chatty. It would carry no conspicuous radiator, no wide sails to tear. Its engine would be geometry. Vents or valves cut to favour certain phases. Cavities designed to self-tune as ice recedes. A crust with dielectric properties that make plasma interactions productive rather than chaotic. Think applied geology, not gleaming alloy. Let fracture do the sculpting. Add only what geology cannot provide. What of data? A scout that values patience would listen more than it speaks field maps, particle counts, dust chemistry, timing of transients, then relay in narrow, opportunistic bursts when geometry is kind. Deep time design would prioritize composability. The scout can piggyback on whatever long baseline networks happen to exist, later pulsars, masers, even planetary magnetospheres as reflectors. A relay signature would not be a beacon. It would be a rhythm, subaudible modulations in charge of plasma sheath properties synced to rotation. A beautiful model is not evidence. It's a checklist disguised as a prayer. So we turn awe into tests. Posture discipline. Does the object prefer thrust-favorable attitudes at statistically implausible rates, even as phase angle evolves? Energy thrift. Do activity levels gate in ways that look like rationing bursts tied to optimal leverage rather than thermal maxima alone? Field use. Are there correlations between solar wind regimes and improved collimation beyond what hydrodynamics predicts? Communication hygiene. Do we ever see anomalous narrowband fluctuations near the object inconsistent with known natural sources, once instrumental and Earth orbit interferences are burned to the ground? Most will return no or inconclusive. That's fine. A model that depends on subtle signatures must accept subtlety as an answer. The point is not to prove built. It is to keep our instrumentation honest about what it would take to notice if. Now the question that hurts a little. What's it scouting for? Not us necessarily. A map maker doesn't center every map on the viewer. It could be surveying field architectures for lanes that last millennia, checking the reliability of star weather as a propulsion substrate, and sampling ice architectures for recipes that self-stabilize. It could be a message to future selves. Here is how to travel cheaply. Here is where to sip safely. Here is how to hide in physics with nothing but patience and shape. Or simpler, lonelier, it could be an orphaned routine, still running, a device whose makers no longer exist, whose purpose has outlived its audience. We would not know the difference at first, and that ignorance is its own awe. The universe keeps functioning even when meanings evaporate. A scout without a home is still a teacher. Silence, again, to keep us decent. We are not promoting a poem to a paper. We are permitting the poem to ask for better papers. Memory, to keep us consistent. We have insisted on two honest lands all along: nature's ingenuity and navigation's thrift. This section does not smuggle the second past the guards. It documents the frontier post-wed build if the border ever moved. Breath, to keep us human. You can feel the chest tighten at the thought that something learned to surf a star and pass by quietly enough that only a disciplined sentry would notice. That tightness is not fear. It's reverence for patience as a form of intelligence, for subtlety as a form of power. If it's a scout, what's it scouting for? Maybe just roots, maybe resources, maybe resonance places where physics cooperates for free. The answer we choose today is not yet. The work we choose is to be the kind of listeners a careful machine would trust. We've designed drives that act like this. The first time you stand behind an electric thruster in a vacuum chamber, you learn a new meaning of quiet. No thunder, no kerosene howl, just a pale plume finding itself a narrow, obedient brightness that knows where it wants to go. Watching the sunward column, you feel that memory wake up. The comet isn't loud either. It speaks in a line: light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence as the human mirror slides into place. Start with shapes. Hall thrusters and ion engines produce plumes that cling to an axis. Magnetic nozzles pinch charged particles into a spine. Magnetoplasma dynamic prototypes flare, then narrow as fields do the sculpting a metal bell once did. In labs and patents, we obsess over collimation, how to keep exhaust from blooming into waste. In the sky, the column does the same theatre: a throat, a spine, a reluctance to fray. Different powers, different scales, same instinct for order, but magnitude matters. Human electric propulsion throws exhaust at tens of kilometers per second. This object's outflow, inferred from the physics of CO2 and dust, lives in the hundreds of meters to perhaps a kilometer per second. That's not an ion engine scream. It's closer to cold gas and steam-class microthrusters. And yet the grammar overlaps. A valve, vent, a chamber, cavity, a nozzle, fracture throat, an aligning field, solar wind, and magnetic drape that helps a plume remember it's a plume. We didn't invent the desire to be neat. We industrialized it. When nature and engineering arrive at the same silhouette, somebody learned a universal trick. The trick is constraint. In rockets, metal shapes the flow. In plasma drives, fields do. Around a nucleus, geometry and environment co-author the constraint. A seam in ice acts like a converging passage. Pressure becomes velocity. The coma's pressure gradient and the sun's fields discourage lateral wandering. In both cases, coherence costs something. You must keep paying power, propellant, or plumbing if you want a line to stay a line. Human devices teach us what receipts to look for. Gating looks like valves pulsing. We see brightness pulses that may be rotation-gated. Vector discipline looks like fixed mounts or gimbals holding attitude. We see a column refinding sunward. Thrift looks like running lean just enough propellant to set a trend. We see a column that rarely goes theatrical yet keeps it say. None of this proves a machine. It proves a convergence. When the universe wants to move something efficiently, it often chooses narrow, repeatable, aligned. Name the engines, check the echoes. Cold gas, steam microthrusters, modest exhaust speeds, exquisite control, on-off simplicity. Echo. CO. Two jets through narrow throats, steam-like impulse in short gates. Electrospray. Colloid thrusters. Tiny plumes, astonishing precision, quiet signatures. Echo. A preference for thrift over spectacle. Micro-corrections implied by small axis nudges. Hall. Ion thrusters. High exhaust velocity, magnetically tamed plumes. Echo. Not speed, but discipline. A spine that resists divergence. MPD. VA Simmer class concepts. Field-shaped outflow, throttleable behavior. Echo. Environmental fields assisting a plume beyond mere gas dynamics. Plasma. Solar sails, field-inflated. Thrust from ambient wind and fields, Massless propellant in principle. Echo. Using the star's weather as part of the engine, not merely as adversary. We repeat the caveat until it's a metronome. Echo is not equal to equivalence. The exhaust velocities don't match the high end of electric propulsion. The power densities are alien to our hardware. The mirror here is structural. Collimation, gating, thrift, and axis discipline. That structural rhyme is what sends the chill because it suggests we and the sky are solving the same optimization problem from opposite directions. Engineering metaphors become checklists. If a system natural or built seeks precision with minimal expenditure, we expect 1. Stable throat physics. A jet base that repairs rather than unravels, observable as a persistent narrow origin after insults. 2. Rotation-synced gating. Brightenings that prefer specific spin phases, repeatable timing over nights. 3. Vector honesty. Non-gravitational residuals keeping faith with the columns mean axis, small, patient, aligned. 4. Environmental leverage. Improved collimation during specific solar wind regimes using field conditions as free plumbing. 5. Economy over drama. No gratuitous flares when leverage is poor. Activity that rises where geometry pays. Each line is testable. Each no is a boundary. Each yes is not proof. It's consilience, multiple small arrows pointing to a single, boring, powerful idea. The most effective push is the one you hardly notice. Light, as ever, writes the lab notebook. Silence keeps us from grading our own paper with generous eyes. Memory reminds us how many times plume discipline in spaceflight surprised us with how little hardware it took once the shape was right. Breath slows the story so adjectives don't slip facts into costume. The human parallel also keeps our humility honest. We have patents for vent arrays that self-tune, papers on magnetic nozzles that collimate without metal bells, bench tests where water turns to thrust in neat pulses for CubeSats. Our species loves the path of least energy that still produces control. The comet, if purely natural, may be telling us we didn't invent that love, we recognized it. And if not purely natural, then the mirror gets colder. A designed traveller, leaning on CO2 for low-temp impulse, letting fractures be nozzles and fields be guards, would look ordinary on purpose, less like a starship, more like a stone that learned timing. The signature wouldn't be speed, it would be discipline under constraint, a line that holds, a habit that does not fatigue, a refusal to waste. A chilling similarity is only useful if it changes what we measure. So we change it. We weight cadence where phase-locked pulses might live. We compare column alignment against solar wind telemetry. We track the along-sun residual with boring devotion. We sift for nights when activity drops despite good heating, because leverage was poor evidence of strategy or self-tuning, depending on your courage. Whether the verdict lands in geology or guidance, the parallel improves us. If geology can accidentally build microthrusters out of ice and sunlight, our comet science needs a propulsion vocabulary. If guidance can deliberately hide inside geology, our search strategies need an engineering conscience. Assume subtlety first. We've designed drives that act like this. That sentence is not a coronation. It's a caution. It says, don't let the familiar seduce you. Let it discipline you. Hold the mirror steady. Admit the chill. Then take measurements that deserve the comparison. Light keeps the ledger open. Silence edits our metaphors. Memory stores both outcomes without shame. Breathing steadies the hand that draws the next checklist. What if this one's just the one we saw? Most of what crosses our sky never becomes a story. Detection is a romance between light and attention, and both are fickle. Brightness is not truth, it's a permission slip. An object that refuses to reflect coal dark, velvet, near-infrared shy can pass a few astronomical heartbeats from our face and remain a rumor. We name our ignorance by what leaks through: light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while we talk about what light can't do. Call it S-452. Not as a proclamation, but as a placeholder for a class. Ultra-low albedo drifters that swallow starlight and pay it back meanly. Imagine a surface closer to soot than snow, grains that turn photons into heat with the brutal efficiency of an apology. Now add geometry. Phase angles that don't favor glints, orientations that deny specular mercy, dust that forward scatters in directions our telescopes weren't looking when it mattered. The result is a population we undercount, Not because it's rare, but because it's rude. Our sky map is biased toward the flamboyant. Surveys are expanding, yes, but selection effects are stubborn. We catch what is bright against the background in the windows we fund, at cadences we can staff, in weather that keeps its promises. A body that glows at the wrong moments, or only in bands we seldom patrol, is a ghost with mass. Our pipelines, trained on familiar comets and reflective rocks, will sometimes file a pitch-black traveller under no detection. That's not failure. It's a confession that darkness can be a strategy, natural or otherwise. The existential exposure is simple and impolite. We see the loud ones. If 3i, Atlas is loud only because a CO2 engine paints a spear the eye can't ignore, then the quiet kin are out there, unadorned, unimaginative, and invisible. The more we admire our cleverness, the more its shadows lengthen. How do you hide in physics without trying? Start with albedo. Make the surface so dark that even generous sunlight returns a miser's dividend. Add texture. Porous, rough microstructure that scatters light into itself. No specular knives to catch at lucky angles. Add grain selection. Larger dust sizes that don't light up the coma like confetti. Fewer forward-scattering gems to announce your passage. Add timing. Activity that peaks when? We're blind, twilight, lunar glare, survey turnover. None of this is a conspiracy. It's the weather. And yet, if someone wanted stealth, they'd choose many of the same settings. They'd prefer materials that act like night. They'd lean on thrust that doesn't become radiance. They'd accept a faint, narrow signature, something a survey might mistake for a processing artifact and throw away with a shrug. Where do our eyes actually close? Cadence gaps. The minutes and hours when no array is pointed that way, because no funding round paid for boring time. Spectral gaps. Bands we sample less often, where a carbon-rich coma might confess, but only if asked politely and frequently. Motion filters. Algorithms that bin fast movers or discard singletons, erasing short, bright whispers that don't repeat. Contrast assumptions. Pipelines that suppress faint, extended structures to rescue point sources, throwing away anti-tails and thin sheets that are, in fact, the whole story. Were improving. New surveys will blink less. But the gap remains. The sky is a continuous film. Our attention is a flipbook. The missing frames are where the dark ones live. S, 5 a negative. 452 is not a villain. It's a mirror. If ultra-dark drifters are common, our archives already hold near misses. Streaks misfiled. Non-detections in fields that later revealed something after the fact. Noise we grew tired of chasing. A future graduate student will pull those frames and discover a pattern we were too busy to love. That is not an indictment. It's how science forgives itself. The younger eyes reread the ledger and add the debt we missed. And what of meaning? The dark hypothesis cuts both ways. Natural, primordial soot, organics baked and rebaked in cold chemistry, surfaces matured into black velvet by the long rain of space. Intentional, coverings chosen to ride sunlight quietly, to keep thermal gradients smooth, to hide in plain physics. The burden of proof remains with evidence. The burden of imagination is ours. We must be able to picture both without flinching. Breathe in, breathe out. Name what changes tomorrow. We change cadence where darkness wins. We budget for off hours, cross-hemisphere handoffs that erase the gaps stealth prefers. We widen spectral habits, giving CO2 and carbon features their due even when glamour sits elsewhere. We adjust filters so a thin, backward-leaning sheet survives the algorithmic broom. We design alert humility into the pipeline. Labels like probably artifact age out if the same almost artifact repeats with sky-fixed consistency across nights. The existential part returns like a tide. If Atlas is loud because it couldn't help but be, how many Atlas kin passed with no spear to betray them? If S-negative 452 exists as a class, the universe is more crowded than our maps. Admit not with civilizations, necessarily, but with possibilities. Crowding changes ethics. We owe more attention to the quiet, more patience to anomalies that refuse to inflate into spectacle. Light cannot do everything. That sentence is not despair. It's a design spec. We add instruments that measure mass without brightness. We listen where we cannot see. We slow the reflex to dismiss what offends our expectation of how a comet should glow. What if this one's just the one we saw? Then our duty is simple. behave as if many did not benefit from that luck. Build a sky that is harder to slip through, unseen out of cadence, out of prejudice, out of the old comfort that the important things will be bright. A single grain at 50 kilometers per second, and the satellite's gone. Most risks in orbit arrive as bureaucracy conjunction emails, Delta V budgets, quiet burns at dawn. Fragmentation changes the accent. When a nucleus sheds itself into a moving weatherfront of sand and needles, the sky stops being administrative and becomes personal. You cannot maneuver away from dust the way you dodge a catalogued bolt. You prepare, you harden, you hide your cross-section and hope. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence as we talk about impact, not metaphor. Start with scale. A comet doesn't explode into confetti and then pause for us to plan. It writes a debris cloud along its path. Boulders down to talc, each with its own idea of how to couple to sunlight and wind. The big pieces stay close to the original trajectory. The light grains peel outward, pushed by radiation pressure into fans and sheets. Hours become days, the head becomes a plural, and the plural becomes a stream that the planets must walk through. Satellites are bad pedestrians. Leo is busy. Geo is delicate. Cislunar is ambitious. None of them is armored for a sandblaster from interstellar grade. Whipple shields turn dust into gas to save structures, but there's always a size that is too big for vaporization and too small for tracking. The bullet that writes its name only once, on the inside of a pressure vessel or a battery wall. You can't dodge what you can't see. You can only get smaller. Operationally, smaller means attitude. Operators slew to put radiators or tanks toward the radiant, the direction from which the cloud will arrive, sacrificing panels and antennas if they must. Instruments with doors close. Telescopes roll their eyes away from the sky they were built to love. Arrays feather. The safest posture is often the least useful one. Science pauses. Commerce holds its breath. The risk isn't ours. It's flux how many particles per square meter per second, and at what sizes. A fragmentation event turns the typical meteoroid background into terrain. Peaks pass as Earth intersects sheets and filaments. Models become weather reports. The radiant drifts by degrees. The speed is brutal. The duration is long enough to matter, short enough to miss if you blink. A single missed peak, and a constellation can earn the wrong kind of headline. We talk about probabilities the way climbers talk about footholds quietly, with a ritual of calm. Most satellites survive most showers, but the tail of the distribution is unforgiving. A grain the mass of a sesame seed at interplanetary speed can pierce layers not designed for war. Even if it doesn't kill, it scars. Solar panels lose watts, radiators pick up hot pixels, star trackers see ghosts, fuel lines acquire worries that don't heal. The cloud doesn't just threaten structure, it threatens time. Fragments don't distribute evenly. Pointing Robertson drag and radiation pressure sort dust by size and patience. The result is coherence ribbons of enhanced density that can revisit a plane year after year as orbits precess and the stream settles. A bad pass this season becomes a calendar entry for next, then the next. We will learn the cloud's rhythm, whether or not we enjoy the music. Avoidance maneuvers are trivial for one satellite, not for a network. Constellations must decide between many small posture changes or a single sustained posture that costs mission time. Crude missions complicate restraint. You don't strand a habitat in a sandstorm, but you also can't armor the moon. Lunar gateways plan safe modes that turn living rooms into bunkers for hours. Mars planners run the numbers twice. Untracked dust in a thin atmosphere is still a bullet if it arrives with enough arrogance. The question slides from, can we observe, to can we endure? Orbital hazards are not rumors. They're responsibilities. Debris management used to mean what we left behind spent stages. Broken panels. Junk that breeds junk. The cloud problem adds what comes to visit. Insurance actuaries learn new words. Launch windows step aside for stream forecasts. The line between paranoia and prudence moves. Caution becomes a budget, not a mood. We build tools with that in mind. Wide-field radars to sample incoming flux at high altitude. In situ dust counters on sacrificial buses that fly the lanes before high-value assets do. Polarization images tuned to the faint glows of big grains. AI classifiers that refuse to throw away thin, backward-leaning sheets as processing artifacts. We share the sky, not as charity but as self-interest. One operator's stream map is everyone's survivability. Memory keeps us honest. We have lived through debris surprises, showers that pricked panels by the thousands, storms that made astronauts sleep in their suits. What's new is the source. A visitor that outlived theories might also export consequences in a quality we undermodel interstellar temperament, carried on interplanetary terms. If the column that fought the sun becomes a fan that fights our hubris, we will learn humility from a different angle. Light stays our ledger. The forward scatter from the stream will reveal its veils, given eyes that don't tire. Silence stays our auditor. The decision to pause operations is made best when the ego is quiet. Breath remains our metronome. In the hours when the forecasted peak paces by, you can hear mission control breathe together. In, don't overreact. Out, don't underprepare. A single grain at 50 kilometers per second, and the satellite's gone. That sentence is not doom. It's design input. It says plan the posture, accept the pause, budget for the unglamorous days when the best science is survival. If it's heavier than it looks, well, no. Light flatters. Mass does not. Where photons can be fooled by darkness and albedo, gravity is incorruptible. It tugs, or it doesn't. So we turn to clocks that do not blink pulsars, the universe's metronomes whose radio beats cross the solar system with sub-microsecond discipline. If a visitor carries more weight than its glow admits, the rhythm will hiccup. We can hear that. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while we trade images for timing. Picture an array not of dishes but of timekeepers. A dozen, then dozens more millisecond pulsars scattered across the sky. Each sends a tick, tick, tick that arrives at Earth with a predictability bordering on rude. Fold those ticks against a solar system model and you have a clean expectation. Subtract expectation from reality, and you get residuals, the tiny leftovers where secrets live. A passing mass, even a modest one, perturbs the barycenter Earth's effective pivot around the Sun, and those perturbations leak into the arrival times. The effect is not dramatic, it is coherent. A slow, shared wiggle across many pulsars that a single telescope could shrug off becomes a signature when the sky agrees with itself. Clocks beat glare, geometry beats guesswork. The breakthrough is twofold. First, pulsar timing arrays stitch many clocks into one ear that spans the sky. Second, AI denoisers, trained on simulated solar system jitters, learn to separate terrestrial fidgets, instrument drift, ionospheric mood swings from celestial nudges. They do not hunt for a specific object. They learn the grammar of gravity and flag sentences that don't parse without an extra comma of mass. We aim not to image the visitor, but to weigh the moment. A sustained non-gravitational push, a jet that won't quit, an albedo that lies none of these can hide from a barycenter that notices every gram that matters. If our ephemerides require a small, consistent correction while the object is in play, the pulsar ledger will show it. Independent of light, impartial to romance, breathe in, breathe out, write numbers only where the sky leaves blanks. A practical pipeline looks like this. Build a baseline, months of timing before the encounter, to learn the room's natural creaks. Observe through the window. Keep cadence high while the object crosses the interior space. Fit the usual suspects. Planetary ephemeris updates, solar wind dispersion, clock standards. Hand the residuals to an AI that was not trained on this event, only on the physics that events must obey. Ask the hardest question gently. Do we need an extra mass term to make the rhythm true? If the column lies about brightness, the clocks won't lie about pull. The confidence here isn't arrogance. It's scope. Pulsar timing arrays already sniff at galaxies through the nanohertz hum of gravitational waves. A mere interplanetary nudge is not beneath them. It's just a different melody in the same band. And because the method listens to the whole solar system's wobble, it cannot be tricked by a single glamorous frame. No spear of light can Photoshop a clock. There's elegance in what we won't get. We won't get a portrait. We won't get a headline image with a sunward jet arguing on our behalf. Well, get a number with bars on it, and those bars will either tolerate a heavier truth or they won't. If it's heavier than it looks, well, no, maybe not how it breathes, but what it weighs on the room. We can widen the ear. Add lunar retroreflectors to tighten Earth's motion. Add deep space transponders, quiet probes on clean arcs to act as intermediate clocks. Synchronize optical pulsar timing where feasible to cross-check radio paths through a noisy ionosphere. Let small, cheap receivers join the net. Timing is democratic when the signal is faithful. The more ears we lend to the sky, the less any single bias can charm us. And if nothing shows, that's an answer too. A mass consistent with a modest nucleus and dust tells us the illusion lives elsewhere. Albedo tricks, jet geometry, field scaffolding. The dignity of no excess would be a relief we earned with rigor rather than hope. Light keeps the pictures beautiful. Timing keeps the world honest. In the dark, honesty is the instrument you reach for first. The next one, well, see coming. Readiness is a kind of kindness you pay forward to your future confusion. We have surveys, yes, and they are brave. But what if vision wasn't a place on Earth or a night in Chile? What if it was a fabric around the sun? Not a telescope that looks from somewhere, but a listening architecture that looks everywhere. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence as we sketch instruments that don't quite exist yet. Start with baselines. Resolution isn't only a bigger mirror. It's a longer distance between mirrors. Quantum-stabilized interferometry, laser-linked optics drifting thousands of kilometers apart can braid faint signals into detail a single aperture can't dream of. You don't tilt one telescope. You choreograph a many-eyed dance whose phase is locked by clocks that lose nanoseconds slower than mountains erode. The result is distributed sight. Dim jets stitched from noise, backward-leaning sheets seen before they boast. Now, put those eyes where sunlight and gravity behave. A Lagrange swarm small craft loafing at L1, L4, L5 turns gravitational parking lots into observatories that never blink. L1 watches the sun's face and the space in between. L4 and L5 catch sideways glints that our ground geometry misses. Give each node 3 gifts. Photon-counting images for the faint, polarimeters to read grain truth from scattered light, plasma sniffers to tell when the solar wind will polish or punish a plume. We don't need one perfect eye, we need many honest ones that agree. Honesty is cadence. A world-scale net that never sleeps makes serendipity a scheduled service. Synthetic tracking, adding many short exposures along a guessed path, becomes trivial when guesses arrive from a dozen parallaxed perches. Autonomous triage lives on the nodes. Tiny AIs that decide in milliseconds which specks deserve deeper breaths, pushing the urgent frames to the front of a shared queue. The network learns to listen together, not shout alone. Quantum helps twice. First, optical lattice clocks aboard anchor craft give time a spine. Interferometers stay in phase across absurd baselines. Second, squeezed light detectors push past classical shot noise. The faint gets a little less shy. Add occulting star shades, the size of billboards for targeted follow-up petals that bloom between an eye and the glare, so a sunward spear can be read without burning the page. Some of this is tomorrow, some is next decade. Tomorrow looks like Rubin surveying without mercy, Neo-Surveyor warming in the infrared, and heliophysics constellations adding context. Magnetospheric multiscale, solar orbiter, Parker. So we stop blaming geometry for what the wind did. We can already put cheap polarimeters on small sats and rideshare to L1. We can deploy cloud pipelines that cross-compare images from amateurs and pros in minutes, not weeks, and auto-flag the thin, backward sheets algorithms used to vacuum away. Next decade is the fabric, kilometer-class optical interferometry, anchored by laser metrology, a triad of star-shade cycling targets, an L5 sentinel that exists only to argue with Earth about parallax until shy objects confess. Throw in cislunar pickets relay cubes with modest scopes that turn the Earth-Moon system into a rotating, phase-tunable baseline. None of these demands magic, only consensus, that seeing must be continuous, plural, and humble. Instruments won't save us if the culture still blinks. Readiness is also how we measure. We need a data commons where raw frames travel as easily as headlines, where probably artifact earns a review when 3 distant nodes see the same artifact move with the stars. We need failure-friendly logs so false alarms are treated as tuition, not embarrassment. We need open ephemerides that let backyard mounts and billion-dollar arrays stand in a single parade instead of parallel ones. The next one won't wait for our pride. Memory keeps us from reinventing the wheel with prettier spokes. Interferometry has been hard before. Starshades have danced before. AI has overpromised before. We write the footnotes on the whiteboard first. Latency, budgets, stray light models, pointing jitter, calibration under dust. Then we breathe and design like adults small steps that accrue into surveillance, that feels less like anxiety and more like care. Silence is the discipline that makes the many-eyed chorus sing. When the net lights up with a candidate, the first response is not a press release. It's a pause where the instruments ask one another, "Do you see it too?" That pause is not a delay. It's confidence manufacture. It's how hope avoids becoming fiction. The next one, well, see coming. Not because luck got kinder, but because we did. We built eyes that refuse to sleep, clocks that refuse to lie, and a culture that refuses to confuse loud with true. Readiness is the hope you can aim for. Maybe the silence is the contact. We were taught to expect conversation antennae blossoming, greetings flung across light years like bottles with warm notes inside. Instead, we got a curriculum of quiet. Telescopes fill with photons that say everything about stars and almost nothing about neighbours. The longer we listen, the more the hush acquires contour, like a landscape seen at night. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while we ask the old question without forcing a young answer. The Fermi paradox dresses itself in arithmetic. The galaxy is large, time is long, engineering is contagious. So where is everyone? Into that gap we pour hypotheses. Maybe most civilizations burn out before they can bloom. Maybe they choose inward projects ethics, art, repair over broadcasting. Maybe prudence is policy. The smart don't shout in forests they haven't mapped. Maybe language itself is provincial. We keep asking for radio when the conversation uses gradients, fields, and patience. What if contact isn't a hello? What if it is a standard, a way of moving through physics with minimal footprint, the etiquette of not waking the room? A scout that sips, not gulps. A trajectory that prefers thrift to theatre. A habit of letting the environment do the talking. You could cross 1,000 systems and leave behind only puzzles for cultures that insist on applause as proof. Silence is not absence, it's a design choice. Oceans don't announce whales. The water remembers them by pressure waves and scars. Space might remember travellers by the small regularities they teach into wind and light, the way a patient vessel learns to surf a star without ever asking for our language. Memory keeps us honest about our part in this. When the sky offers anomalies, we demand that they become messages. When they don't, we call them coy. But perhaps restraint is the message. Power measured by how little disturbance it requires. Curiosity measured by how lightly it steps. If the universe tutors by example, then the lesson isn't we are here. It's this is how to be here without harm. Breath slows the ache that rides with that thought. Cosmic isolation is a human flavour. The cosmos itself is not lonely. It is busy. It is loud with hydrogen and gravity. Our loneliness comes from wanting mirrors. Silence is the refusal to be our mirror, and the invitation to become better listeners anyway. So we listen for standards instead of slogans. Coherence without waste. Motion without bravado. Signatures that recur like politeness. If the quiet is contact, then it asks nothing dramatic of us, only that we grow up enough to recognize courtesy at cosmic scale. Maybe the silence is the contact. Maybe the lesson is to answer in kind. By learning to move through our own backyard with less noise, by letting light and wind do more of the work, by reserving wonder not for thunder, but for discipline. What if our models weren't just wrong, but too small? Lines we thought were borders keep turning into thresholds. We drew one between rock and will, another between chemistry and choreography, another between noise and signal. Each time, the light refused to honour them cleanly. The question rising now isn't about a verdict. It's about scale. Are we still doing astrophysics, matter and forces, or have we wandered into astrobiology systems that use matter and forces for aims? Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence while we let the frame widen. Astrophysics asks how. Sublimation rates. Field geometry. Torque. Thrust. Astrobiology asks why here, why now, why like this, not poetry but function. A river cuts a valley, a beaver builds a dam. Both obey gravity, only one leverages it. If a sunward column keeps recentering as though tacking, if energy thrift keeps winning over spectacle, if persistence survives environments that reward decay, then our nouns feel crowded. Jet still works. So does strategy. Crossing the line is not declaring the answer, it's admitting the answer might exist. We're not promoting anomalies to intentions by vote. We're clarifying what a yes would require. Astrophysics alone must show accidental feedbacks that conserve coherence irresponsibly well. Astrobiology must survive the same math and add information patterns that look like optimization rather than luck. Timing gated to leverage. Adjustments that match changing wind. Signatures that conserve effort across contexts. The existential pivot is humility. If the line is real and we're near it, the universe didn't become different. We did. We built instruments and habits sharp enough to notice when behavior begins to look like use. That noticing doesn't collapse into celebration. It expands into responsibility. To design tests that let no be as valuable as maybe. If the frame widens, the stakes do too. A world where comet physics includes self-stabilizing nozzles and field-aided lanes is already larger than the one we inherited. A world where travelers choose those lanes is larger still and calmer than our fiction. No empires, no declarations, just competence, expressed as silence that works. The shift for us is practical. Funding for instruments that can tell thrift from spectacle. Pedagogy that teaches optimization as a diagnostic. Diplomacy that treats the sky as a commons, where courtesy is a physics. Breathe in, breathe out. Name the crossing without forcing it. Astrobiology or astrophysics? The honest answer today is both, because whichever side wins this case, the other improves. If nature alone can impersonate guidance this well, our astrophysics is too small. If something guided, our astrobiology was too timid. Either way, we learn to read function without surrendering fact. What if our models weren't just wrong, but too small? Then we make bigger ones, disciplined, testable, generous enough to hold a river and a dam in the same sentence, a jet and a choice in the same light. The sky never closes. It only exhales. The instrument caps go back on. Schedules normalize. Somewhere, a graduate student finally sleeps. But the feeling in the room doesn't end. It thins, like fog deciding to be air again. We add the last entries to the log, not as verdicts, but as weather notes what the wind did around a small body that refused to behave like a footnote. Light, silence, memory, breath. Keep the cadence as we let the story land without locking it. We've named what we can, columns and coherences, thrift over spectacle, a chemistry that prefers cold to kitchens. We've admitted what we can't, whether a discipline we recognize was geology with good luck or guidance with good manners. Either way, something changed us, not the object, us. We learned to hear patience as a signal, to treat restraint as data, to widen our alarms until they included the possibility of courtesy. There will be another. It's already inbound in the arithmetic of large spaces, an untracked dot finding its line against a background that has seen this before. The next one may be modest and ordinary, a reminder that most travelers are weather, or it may arrive carrying some fraction of this same posture, a narrow habit that resists smearing, a rhythm that prefers leverage to noise. When it does, we will be ready to measure first and narrate later. We didn't solve the whisper. We learned how to live with it. Living with it means better ears, arrays that don't blink, pipelines that learn to doubt their own brooms, timing nets that weigh the room when brightness tries to lie. It means cultural upgrades credit for careful no's, humility for attractive maybes, a commons of data that treats the entire sky as a shared responsibility rather than a collection of private miracles. It means telling students that wonder isn't the opposite of rigor. It's what survives rigor. The unresolved whisper remains, and that's not a failure. Most of the universe is unresolved whispers. Stars hum. Dust argues in slow grammar. Gravity finishes our sentences without asking permission. We thought we needed declarations to feel accompanied. What we needed was continuity, a sense that the story doesn't end when an object slips from view. It folds into the next frame, the next cadence, the next patient test. Breathe in. Let the question be big. Breathe out. Let the answer be small and true. We step back from the screen. The quiet in the dome is no longer tense. It's kind. The sky is still busy. So are we. The work ahead is clear enough to be comforting. Keep the eyes open. Keep the clocks honest. Keep the sentences short when the facts are. Learn to move through our own backyard with less noise, because we now suspect someone else has been doing that for a very long time. The final mirror line returns, not as a tease, but as a standard to hold ourselves to an ethic for measurement and for meaning. We don't need to turn every anomaly into a hymn. We need to listen well enough that hymns, if they ever arrive, can be recognized as such without jealousy from the quieter truths. The sky doesn't close. It keeps offering reminders that we are part of the pattern even when we don't know which part. We answer by remaining present, eyes steady, hands clean, language careful, gratitude intact. It wasn't a message, but it meant something.
Mientras tanto, mucho más lejos, el viajero interestelar 3i Atlas continuaba su deriva muda. Su ruta se superponía con el campo de plasma en expansión lanzado por el Sol. Para Atlas no era nada. Hielo y roca deslizándose en la oscuridad. Para la humanidad, en cambio, la imagen de Atlas, cruzando una tormenta de lo invisible, se volvió una metáfora inquietante. Un testigo frío flotando entre el caos magnético, mientras nosotros solo podíamos mirar desde abajo. Los titulares bramaron. Atlas camina por la tempestad mientras la humanidad tiembla. Las emociones que barrieron el planeta fueron una mezcla de terror y suspense. Terror, porque un cuerpo celeste a millones de kilómetros podía desatar energías capaces de paralizar una civilización electrónica. Suspense, porque todo el mundo sabía que el impacto llegaría y nadie podía predecir su escala. Era como observar un tsunami de cientos de metros avanzando hacia la costa. Inevitable, pero indescifrable en su violencia final. Bajo ese miedo corrían otras corrientes, curiosidad, pues los científicos vibraban ante la oportunidad de capturar datos de una de las tormentas geomagnéticas más fuertes de la era moderna. Y excitación, porque quizá por fin vislumbraríamos las entrañas del escudo magnético terrestre. Pero, por encima de todo, un pavor paralizante. En el instante en que el plasma chocara con la magnetosfera, la civilización podía perder aquello que creía intocable: electricidad, internet, satélites y la frágil ilusión de control. 7 de enero de 2025. Los relojes de cuenta atrás en los centros de pronóstico del mundo llegaron a cero. Y entonces llegó el impacto. Una CME colosal, liberada desde la mancha AR-3590, golpeó la Tierra. No hubo sonido ni destello inmediato. Pero en la alta atmósfera, la magnetosfera se estremeció. En minutos, todo el planeta pareció atrapado por una mano invisible, comprimido dentro de un caos magnético. Los magnetómetros se desbordaron. El índice KP clavó en 9, el máximo posible. En Alaska, los medidores de campo eléctrico enloquecieron, las agujas girando como si se desgarraran. Un científico en Fairbanks exclamó en directo: «Estamos en el ojo de la tormenta. Es el evento geomagnético más fuerte desde Carrington, 1859, y el cielo estalló en un espectáculo surrealista, no solo en latitudes altas, sino hasta Florida, Texas, El Cairo y Mumbai. Las auroras descendieron como cortinas verdes, carmesí y violetas, retorciéndose y desplegándose. Bandas de luz cayeron como ríos, deslumbrantes y ominosas. Un hombre en México escribió: «Es bellísimo, pero no sé si miro un milagro o el fin del mundo». En tierra, la infraestructura crujió. Cientos de satélites perdieron señal. Algunos quedaron totalmente a oscuras. El GPS se desvió cientos de metros, obligando a aviones y barcos a volver a la navegación manual. En Canadá, transformadores sobrecargados explotaron en cadena, hundiendo a millones en una oscuridad gélida. En Suecia, las redes móviles colapsaron a nivel nacional y la gente hizo fila en los pocos teléfonos públicos que aún funcionaban. Los primeros minutos tras el impacto sumieron al mundo en un suspense tenso. Los informativos empalmaron auroras majestuosas con escenas de apagones, tráfico desquiciado y multitudes abalanzándose sobre velas, pilas y comida. Analistas, ante cámaras, con voces trémulas de asombro y pavor: «Estamos presenciando el mayor experimento natural de la historia moderna. Si continúa, podría escalar a catástrofe global». El pánico se propagó. En Nueva York, miles se congregaron en Times Square para ver un cielo rojo sangre ondular sobre sus cabezas, mientras los carteles LED titilaron y luego se apagaron. En Japón, los trenes bala Shinkansen se detuvieron en seco a mitad de ruta cuando fallaron los sistemas de control. En Sudáfrica, los habitantes de Johannesburgo vieron auroras por primera vez. El asombro inicial se convirtió en miedo cuando Internet cayó a nivel nacional. Mientras tanto, Atlas derivaba en silencio en el borde externo de la ola de plasma que azotó la Tierra. Astrónomos lograron captar lo tenue, un punto solitario, enmarcado por un cielo distorsionado magnéticamente. Los periódicos lo bautizaron el viajero de la tormenta, testigo frío deslizándose donde la humanidad solo podía temblar desde abajo. Su silencio, frente al frenesí terrestre, volvió la visión aún más espectral. Las emociones dominantes fueron terror y suspense. Terror, porque todo lo que sostiene la vida moderna, electricidad, redes, satélites, podía desvanecerse en minutos. Suspense, porque nadie sabía cuánto duraría el choque, ni si más CME ya corrían tras la primera. En los ojos alzados que reflejaban las auroras, la luz cargaba algo más que belleza. Traía la constatación de una verdad brutal. Nuestra civilización electrónica es más frágil de lo que jamás imaginamos. Cuando la tormenta solar superó su primera embestida, el mundo empezó a sentir el saldo duradero. Ya no eran las auroras deslumbrantes, sino líneas chamuscadas, redes de telecomunicaciones trastocadas y sistemas antes seguros expuestos en su fragilidad. En Norteamérica, la red de Quebec colapsó casi por completo. La gente soportó días sin electricidad en un frío atroz. Los hospitales se vieron desbordados por casos de hipotermia. En Europa, la banca online se congeló a medida que se acumulaban errores satelitales. Millones de transacciones quedaron suspendidas. Se formaron largas colas en los pocos cajeros aún operativos, con el temor de que los ahorros se disolvieran en dígitos sin pantalla. En Sudamérica, un Internet errático paralizó la agrometeorología, obligando a sembrar a ciegas. En salud, el golpe fue más inquietante. Dispositivos médicos sincronizados por señales temporales se desajustaron. Marcapasos enviaron alertas urgentes, sembrando pánico en familias con personas mayores. En un hospital sueco, los cirujanos pospusieron operaciones cuando dejó de ser fiable el monitoreo cardíaco. Un médico escribió: «Por primera vez en mi carrera tuve que preguntarme, ¿confiamos en las máquinas o solo en nuestras manos y ojos?» La economía global tembló. Las acciones de telecomunicaciones, aerolíneas y energía se hundieron. Tokio perdió más de 1000 puntos en una mañana. Wall Street vivió su jornada más caótica desde 2008. Los expertos advirtieron: si la tormenta persistía varios días, el daño podría escalar a billones. Para la gente, esas cifras eran sombras abstractas. Lo concreto era simple: luces que no encienden, Internet que no conecta, teléfonos convertidos en ladrillos silenciosos. Y sin embargo, en medio del caos surgió una corriente opuesta en la ciencia: curiosidad y euforia. Por primera vez en décadas, había datos en tiempo real de una tormenta geomagnética de nivel pico. Magnetómetros desde Groenlandia hasta la Antártida volcaron terabytes de lecturas. Gráficos de fluctuaciones revelaron choques más fuertes que cualquier registro previo. Satélites científicos como ACE y DSC-OVR siguieron corrientes de plasma más densas y rápidas de lo pronosticado. Un investigador de la NASA exclamó: «Es la primera vez que vemos a la Tierra temblar dentro de su propio campo magnético». La biomedicina aprovechó el momento para estudiar efectos humanos. Sensores en voluntarios de varios países registraron picos de frecuencia cardíaca, sueño interrumpido y aumentos de hormonas del estrés durante la tormenta. Algunos médicos plantearon nuevas preguntas. ¿Sincroniza el cuerpo, al menos en parte, con el campo magnético terrestre? Y si es así, ¿puede el Sol moldear directamente nuestras emociones y salud mental? El entusiasmo no borró el miedo, pero creó una paradoja. Mientras la sociedad se asustaba, la ciencia vio una oportunidad dorada para profundizar el entendimiento del cosmos. Los medios lo llamaron la emoción dual: terror por un lado, hambre de descubrimiento por el otro. Y entre ambos extremos derivaba Atlas, sombra silenciosa deslizándose por el vacío chamuscado por la tormenta, recordando que solo somos pequeños observadores en un drama cósmico escrito por el universo. El pulso global se volvió mezcla rara, terror y suspense entretejidos con curiosidad y euforia. Terror, porque la infraestructura moderna se mostró de cristal. Suspense, porque nadie sabía cuán poderosa sería la siguiente CME. Curiosidad y euforia, porque jamás habíamos tenido butaca de primera fila ante un experimento natural que abarcara el planeta entero. Cuando la tormenta geomagnética amainó a finales de la segunda semana de enero de 2025, la Tierra no se había derrumbado, pero las cicatrices perdurarían. Las ciudades fueron restableciendo la energía, los satélites recuperaron señales poco a poco, las bolsas volvieron a cojear hacia la normalidad. Aún así, en la memoria de miles de millones, quedó grabado el instante en que el cielo explotó en auroras y las pantallas se apagaron a la vez. Por primera vez en generaciones, la humanidad sintió la fragilidad desnuda de la civilización electrónica que había construido. Los expertos la bautizaron la prueba de estrés de la civilización. No fue una guerra, ni un crack económico, sino el Sol, la misma estrella que nos da vida convertida en gigante enfurecido, probando cada capa de nuestro caparazón tecnológico. Los informes de daños hablaron de cientos de miles de millones, pero las cifras importaron menos que la revelación. Una tormenta geomagnética, invisible y silenciosa, puede sacudir cada ilusión de permanencia que tenemos sobre el mundo moderno. En cumbres de emergencia, los líderes tragaron una verdad amarga. No existe un escudo capaz de bloquear al Sol. Programas como Solar Shield o Aurora Shield amortiguan, pero nunca anulan el riesgo. Un legislador europeo lo dijo sin rodeos. Hemos construido nuestra civilización sobre arena. Una ráfaga de viento solar puede barrer la ilusión de eternidad tecnológica. La frase se citó por miles, helando y a la vez validando al público. Dentro de ese desasosiego asomó otra luz, la lección de humildad. Filósofos la llamaron el recordatorio cósmico. Nos habituamos al control, pulsar un interruptor y tener luz, tocar un botón y tener internet. La tormenta mostró que, detrás de la comodidad, hay una fuerza tan inmensa que nos trasciende. Solo al enfrentarnos a esa impotencia empezamos a comprender la verdad. Somos un hilo frágil en una vasta trama cósmica. Atlas, como siempre, siguió su curso en silencio. No causó la tormenta ni el plasma lo marcó, pero nunca se invocó tanto su imagen. La gente lo llamó el testigo silente. Mientras los sistemas humanos fallaban y el cielo ardía, Atlas mantuvo su trayectoria. Esa indiferencia lo convirtió en símbolo, prueba de que el universo no gira a nuestro alrededor, y de que lo que llamamos apocalipsis no es, para él, más que un rizo pasajero. En redes millones compartieron un mismo mensaje. Somos frágiles. Atlas nos lo recuerda. Una imagen icónica desde un telescopio chileno capturó la aurora rojo sangre cubriendo el cielo, con Atlas como punto minúsculo en la esquina. Se volvió emblema global, la furia caótica del sol frente al silencio helado de un caminante. En esa foto muchos vieron miedo y despertaron a la vez. La emoción de esta fase fue un acorde complejo. Terror y suspense mezclados con curiosidad, euforia y desasosiego ante la escala del influjo cósmico. Pero, a diferencia de los primeros días, el miedo mutó del pánico ciego a algo más frío y contemplativo. La gente empezó a preguntar, si una sola tormenta nos sacude así, ¿qué ocurriría con algo mayor, otro Carrington? O peor. No había respuesta. Esas preguntas transformaron el temor en combustible para ciencia, resiliencia y preparación. Al terminar enero, la humanidad sabía que había sobrevivido a un golpe casi letal, y también que no sería el último. En la memoria colectiva, la idea principal 8 dejó una marca ardiente. Vivimos en un universo inseguro, y la fragilidad de nuestra civilización electrónica queda expuesta cada vez que el sol decide enfurecerse. Atlas, aún deslizándose sin palabra por el alto cielo, siguió como un punto tenue en la sinfonía cósmica, recordándonos que el próximo capítulo de esta historia aún no está escrito. Marzo de 2025. Mientras la humanidad aún cojeaba fuera del caos de la tormenta geomagnética de principios de año, comenzó a alzarse una nueva oleada de emoción. Esta vez no era miedo ni ansiedad, sino expectación y asombro científico. La astronomía estaba a punto de presenciar un encuentro sin precedentes. El viajero interestelar 3I Atlas. El visitante misterioso que había sacudido al mundo durante meses estaba a punto de rozar Marte. La prensa y las redes sociales le dieron enseguida un apodo romántico, una cita a ciegas entre un huésped interestelar y Marte. No se trataba de un escenario de colisión o destrucción. La órbita de Atlas se había calculado con precisión. Cruzaría cerca de Marte a una distancia segura, pero lo bastante próxima como para convertirse en un experimento natural inestimable. Los orbitadores marcianos tendrían una oportunidad única de registrar datos directos, estructura superficial, composición de su polvo helado, e incluso los rastros de plasma que Atlas pudiera dejar al rozar el viento solar. Para la comunidad científica, era un sueño. Un cuerpo celeste nacido fuera del sistema solar, cargando secretos tan antiguos como el universo mismo, pasando junto al planeta sobre el que la humanidad lleva generaciones soñando con aminar. La atmósfera en los centros de investigación del mundo se espesó de expectación. En Pasadena, la sala de control del JPL permaneció encendida toda la noche. Los ingenieros ajustaron la trayectoria de Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, asegurando que la cámara HiRISE captara hasta los detalles más diminutos mientras Atlas derivaba. Maven se preparó para medir fluctuaciones de plasma, mientras que el TGO de ExoMars se alineó para escaneos espectroscópicos con la esperanza de atrapar trazas de polvo cuando Atlas rozara los cielos marcianos. En Darmstadt, Alemania, el control de misión de la ESA montó una sala de guerra repleta de pantallas gigantes con simulaciones 3D de la órbita de Atlas, cortando el alcance gravitatorio del planeta rojo. En Japón, el telescopio Subaru y ALMA recibieron máxima prioridad, listos para emitir cobertura en vivo al mundo entero. En Chile, los astrónomos de Paranal prepararon su mayor campaña de observación desde el gran cometa Hale-Bopp de 1997. A través de los continentes, la gente se apresuró a comprar telescopios de aficionado, ansiosa por convertirse en testigo de este rendezvous cósmico. En redes, el hashtag MarsEncounter estalló. En días, aparecieron cientos de millones de publicaciones de científicos, estudiantes y soñadores cotidianos. El ambiente global parecía la cuenta atrás de unos Juegos Olímpicos del cosmos. Pero, a diferencia del deporte, no era una competencia entre naciones, sino una celebración colectiva, un festival planetario con todas las miradas hacia el cielo, esperando un momento histórico. Los artículos compararon el evento con otros hitos. Galileo vislumbrando las lunas de Júpiter, Voyager enviando la imagen de la pálida mota azul, o el aterrizaje de Curiosity en Marte. Pero esta vez, la humanidad no era la conquistadora, éramos la audiencia, con una entrada rara para ver al propio universo escribir un nuevo capítulo, un viajero distante rozando el planeta rojo, el mundo que hemos querido alcanzar durante generaciones. Las emociones dominantes fueron la expectativa y la curiosidad científica. Los investigadores se preguntaban, ¿podría Atlas albergar compuestos orgánicos desconocidos? Si su polvo se filtrara a la atmósfera marciana, ¿dejaría huellas químicas que apuntaran a los orígenes de la vida? ¿Sería esta la oportunidad de comparar material interestelar con las muestras de suelo y hielo que las misiones de Marte se preparan para devolver? Cada pregunta sumaba suspense, como si el planeta entero estuviera sentado en un teatro esperando a que se alzara el telón. También surgieron emociones secundarias, suspense y sentido histórico. Suspense, porque todo dependía de unas pocas horas durante el roce de Atlas con Marte. Si el clima fallaba o los instrumentos se averiaban, la humanidad podría perder los datos más valiosos en décadas. Y sentido histórico, porque algún día, cuando los niños abran sus libros de astronomía, leerán un capítulo que diga: en marzo de 2025, la humanidad presenció el encuentro entre 3I Atlas y Marte. En ese momento, Atlas volvió a cambiar de símbolo. Ya no era el oscuro presagio que proyectaba ansiedad durante las tormentas solares, sino el narrador silencioso del cosmos portador de misterios de reinos jamás alcanzados pasando junto al planeta rojo para encender la sed de conocimiento. Y por fin, tras meses de miedo, la humanidad levantó la mirada no para temblar, sino para esperar con el corazón acelerado, esperanzada, expectante, viva de asombro. Para preparar lo que llamaron una cita a ciegas del cosmos, la humanidad orquestó sus esfuerzos hasta el último detalle. Desde orbitadores alrededor de Marte hasta telescopios repartidos por la Tierra, una red interplanetaria de observación cobró vida, como si una civilización entera alzara la cabeza para ver a un huésped silencioso entrar en escena. En lo alto del planeta rojo, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, ajustó el ángulo de su cámara HiRISE, la más potente jamás enviada al espacio, lista para capturar primeros planos de Atlas al pasar. Los ingenieros del JPL calcularon tiempos de exposición al milisegundo, sabiendo que Atlas se movía tan deprisa que el mínimo error lo convertiría en una estela borrosa. A la vez, la sonda MAVEN enfocó sus lecturas de plasma, con la esperanza de registrar la interacción entre el polvo de Atlas y la tenue atmósfera de Marte. Si se producía intercambio de carga, sería la primera mirada directa de la humanidad a un cuerpo interestelar tocando un planeta del sistema solar. La ESA estaba igual de volcada. El Trace Gas Orbiter programó escaneos infrarrojos para buscar gases raros que Atlas pudiera portar. Algunos científicos especularon que, si su polvo helado contenía compuestos orgánicos, la atmósfera marciana podría brillar fugazmente en longitudes de onda inusuales. Bastarían unos minutos de observación para obtener datos capaces de rehacer nuestra comprensión de la química interestelar. En la Tierra, la red de observatorios se extendía desde Mauna Kea en Hawái hasta ALMA en Chile, del Gran Telescopio Canarias a los observatorios sudafricanos, todos sincronizados al tiempo internacional, todos apuntando a un único punto donde la órbita de Atlas rozaría la senda de Marte. Los científicos lo describieron como una sinfonía global de telescopios. Los ojos de la humanidad uniéndose en coro para capturar un instante cósmico fugaz. Los medios internacionales transformaron el evento en un festival. Las cadenas montaron escenarios de cuenta atrás. En Times Square, una pantalla gigante mostraba la trayectoria de Atlas como un hilo luminoso barriendo Marte. En Tokio, multitudes se agolparon en Shibuya para ver la retransmisión de JAXA, mientras en Nairobi una universidad organizó una velada comunitaria con binoculares gastados y pequeños telescopios. En todo el mundo, millones aguardaron bajo el mismo cielo, como si la historia estuviera a punto de pasar de página escrita en polvo cósmico. El ánimo prevalente no era el miedo, se sentía como una celebración del descubrimiento. En Berlín, un artista pintó un mural gigante, Atlas, personificado como caminante encapuchado de hielo, encontrándose con Marte rojo y ardiente, como un bailarín entrando al escenario. En Brasil, músicos compusieron Danza de Polvo y Fuego, un tango del cosmos inspirado en el encuentro. En línea, los memes se propagaron con chispa, bautizando a Atlas como el viajero interestelar buscando su primer amor. Y sin embargo, entre risas y arte latía una hebra de tensión. Los científicos recordaban al mundo que era una oportunidad irrepetible. Atlas no regresaría. Tras su breve encuentro se perdería para siempre en la noche interestelar. Si fallaba la técnica, un fallo de cámara o una tormenta de polvo marciana, los datos se esfumarían con él. Un astrónomo japonés dijo a los reporteros: «Esto es historia, o la capturamos o desaparece en el vacío para no volver». A lo largo de tanta expectación humana, Atlas siguió siendo lo que siempre fue, un punto frío e indiferente de luz, deslizándose constante por su ruta, imperturbable ante el bullicio de abajo. Su silencio cargó de peso el momento. No ofreció promesas ni señales ni avisos. Simplemente pasó. Y, precisamente por esa indiferencia, su presencia congregó la mirada de toda una especie desde ingenieros de NASA, entornando los ojos frente a pantallas de control, hasta un niño en África, abrazado a un telescopio de segunda mano, cada corazón latiendo más rápido, esperando que se alzara el telón de la cita a ciegas entre Atlas y Marte, 16 de marzo de 2025. Los relojes de cuenta atrás en pantallas gigantes de todo el mundo marcaron 0. En las horas siguientes, la humanidad presenciaría lo que se había llamado la cita a ciegas entre Atlas y Marte. Observatorios, orbitadores y telescopios estaban en plena alerta, y cuando Atlas penetró en el alcance gravitacional del planeta rojo, el mundo entró en un instante de expectación contenida destinado a cargar peso histórico. Desde la órbita marciana, MRO transmitió las primeras imágenes. Un cuerpo alargado, envuelto en hielo y polvo, reflejando la pálida luz solar. HiRISE captó detalles tan nítidos que se distinguían fisuras cicatrizando su superficie, zonas donde el hielo parecía sublimar directamente al vapor. Dentro del control del JPL estallaron los aplausos. Algunos lloraron. Nadie se atrevió a imaginar que un día veríamos tan de cerca a un visitante interestelar. Mientras tanto, Maven registró señales de plasma extrañas. Al rozar la cola polvorienta de Atlas, la alta atmósfera marciana, los sensores midieron una ionización intensa. Un halo tenue titiló por instantes alrededor del planeta una corona fantasmal. Un científico exclamó: «La historia se despliega. Acabamos de ver a Marte tocado por escombros interestelares». Los datos llegaron a la Tierra en tiempo real y las redes estallaron con visualizaciones deslumbrantes. El planeta rojo envuelto en un velo plateado y pasajero, regalo fugaz de un viajero nacido más allá del dominio del Sol. El TGO de la ESA aportó sus propias revelaciones. Los espectros infrarrojos mostraron trazas de cianuro y pequeñas cantidades de formaldehído en la estela de Atlas. No era evidencia de vida, pero sí una pista crucial en el gran rompecabezas. ¿Cómo podrían sembrarse compuestos orgánicos por los mundos a través de huéspedes interestelares? Los científicos reavivaron el debate de la panspermia, la hipótesis provocadora de que la vida pueda ser sembrada desde las estrellas, y la idea ardió en titulares. En televisión, un profesor reflexionó: quizá Atlas sea solo de paso, pero, al pasar, nos deja fragmentos para leer, frases escritas en polvo y gas. En la Tierra, telescopios como ALMA y Subaru reportaron cambios en el brillo de Atlas al aproximarse a Marte. Las curvas de luz sugerían desgasificación súbita. Tal vez la gravedad marciana tiró de su corteza, fracturándola. Chorros de materia se extendieron formando una pluma de decenas de miles de kilómetros, una bufanda translúcida arropando a Marte. Los titulares no tardaron. Marte recibe una bufanda cósmica. Para el público global conectado en vivo, las emociones fueron universales. Curiosidad, suspense y el vértigo de ser testigo de la historia. En Times Square, la multitud estalló cuando los primeros planos aparecieron en la pantalla colosal. En Tokio, los peatones se detuvieron en Shibuya, ojos fijos en los rótulos brillantes, aplaudiendo como ante fuegos artificiales. En Kenia, estudiantes gritaron de alegría cuando su modesto telescopio captó una tenue estela junto a Marte. Por doquier, susurros de asombro. Acabamos de ver historia. Y en medio de todo, Atlas siguió navegando, ajeno a haberse convertido en el centro de uno de los momentos más observados por la humanidad. No hizo promesas ni ofreció explicaciones, simplemente pasó. Sin embargo, su silencio amplificó el anhelo humano, agrandando tanto la curiosidad científica como el asombro existencial. Porque si un solo encuentro cercano podía dar tantos datos y preguntas, ¿cuántos secretos esconden los incontables cuerpos interestelares que vagan invisibles por el vacío? A medida que Atlas se alejaba, dejando atrás la órbita marciana, el mundo cayó en un silencio inusual. No más cuentas atrás, no más vítores, solo torrentes de datos crudos fluyendo desde orbitadores y telescopios. En ese silencio cristalizó una verdad. La humanidad acababa de presenciar un acontecimiento de alcance cósmico. Los científicos se lanzaron al análisis, y cada línea de datos abría un nuevo capítulo. Los espectros del TGO confirmaron la presencia de compuestos orgánicos simples, reforzando la idea de que cuerpos interestelares pueden transportar ladrillos básicos de la vida. Las lecturas de plasma de Maven revelaron detalles inéditos sobre cómo el polvo y los gases de Atlas interactuaron con la atmósfera marciana, dejando un rastro temporal en su ionosfera. Y las imágenes de High-Rise tan nítidas que mostraban pequeñas fisuras sobre la superficie de Atlas fueron comparadas al instante con los primeros bocetos de Galileo de las lunas de Júpiter. Imperfectas, pero poderosas para cambiar la visión humana del cosmos. Los medios rugieron con titulares: Historia escrita en polvo y órbitas, Marte y Atlas. Una cita a ciegas grabada para siempre. En parques y plazas, la gente se quedó conversando largo rato, aún sobrecogida. Una maestra en Perú dijo a sus alumnos: hoy no estudiaron astronomía. Vivieron dentro de una lección escrita por el universo. Sus palabras se difundieron ampliamente, símbolo del momento. Las emociones dominantes, expectativa y curiosidad científica, se mezclaron con algo más hondo: orgullo existencial. La humanidad se reconoció frágil y pequeña, pero capaz aún de estirar su mirada al espacio interestelar y capturar la luz fugaz de un viajero del más allá. Las emociones secundarias, suspense, vértigo histórico, se transformaron en algo más firme: convicción. Toda una generación recordará para siempre que vivió el día en que Atlas rozó Marte. En conferencias científicas de emergencia, los debates cobraron vida. Algunos subrayaron que los datos de Atlas afinarían nuestro entendimiento de la formación de sistemas planetarios. Otros se inclinaron por la panspermia, sugiriendo que la vida en la Tierra podría deber su origen a visitantes interestelares. Las opiniones divergían, pero un consenso sonó claro: Atlas abrió una puerta nueva al conocimiento, una que tardaremos décadas en desentrañar. El impacto trascendió la ciencia. Filósofos, artistas y ciudadanos se sintieron distintos. En Roma, una catedral celebró una oración, llamando al encuentro una señal de humildad. En Nueva York, un colectivo musical interpretó la sinfonía de la cita a ciegas, entretejiendo instrumentos electrónicos con datos de plasma